Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Became Eri's Guardian. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was his alarm that awoke Izuku Midoriya. He groaned and reached over to it, tapping its button to turn it off. His hand slipped off and hung loosely off the bed with his arm as he tried to force himself awake. He blinked, trying to remove the sleep from his eyes. When they persisted against his will, he tried to move his other arm to rub it away. But as he pulled it to himself, he could feel it be pulled away. So he opted and forced himself to use his lazy hand instead, blinking and widening his eyes to help keep himself awake. Izuku rolled his head to face the other side and smiled at the sight of the girl hugging his arm and snuggling it to her chest, still sound asleep. Izuku rolled his body to face her, using the arm she held to pull her against him and rest her on his chest. He leaned his head down and plopped a soft kiss on her head, smiling as she snuggled him more. Midoriya wondered how he got so lucky to have Eri in his life, and to be to her what she needed, a father. It had been over a month since the heroes had raided and arrested the 8 precepts of death in Chisaki, along with rescuing Eri from their hold. The young girl kept herself latched to Togata Mirio when they left, and when she was forced off him to be medically treated for his wounds, she clung to Midoriya instead. She shied away from the other heroes, even Midoriya's classmates, refusing to talk to anyone. Even doctors had a hard time treating her, with how much she would panic when they spoke or approached. It took all of Midoriya's might and soothing words to calm her enough for the doctors to draw on one small blood sample before she broke again, finding comfort and a place in Izuku's arms. And there she would stay. A week later, Izuku's mom filled out the paperwork to legally be Eri's mother and welcome her into her home. But Eri refused to be anywhere without Midoriya. While now a member of the Midoriya family, she only trusted Izuku enough to stay with him. He tried to move back home to live with his mother and Eri, but his mother told him it was no need. She didn't want him to have to cut off his friends so soon and distance himself from them more, with how happy she was that he actually had friends. So the mother and son did what they could to work out an agreement with the school that Eri would live with Izuku in his dorm. And even though it had been a month, Eri had not really opened up to the rest of Class 1A. Most of the time, if Izuku wasn't in class, she would stay with him in his room. She would wait there when he would go down to bring food and drinks to his, or now their, room. Or if she went down with him, she would grip his shirt and sit in his arms, refusing to look around anywhere other than his chest or shoulder. If they went out, they went alone, still together like glue. The teachers could barely get a response out of her, which was more than the students got, but she only really trusted Principal Nezu and All Might, if only slightly more than the rest. Midoriya had tried to get her to open up to his classmates, to give her more friends as she could have. But sometimes too many to start to crowd around her, or they would be yelling at each other, and Eri would panic and curl up against Izuku. And then he would take her back to their room, alone, and spend an hour at the most doing everything in his power to calm her down and see her smile again. It was her smiles that let him know everything he did now was worth it. Daddy. Midoriya looked down at the girl as she yawned and stretched and looked up at him and smiled. Good morning, Daddy. It had been 2 weeks since she started calling him that. She had done it one night, before they went to bed. Izuku had been telling her stories of his past, altering them slightly for her sake. She enjoyed their story times, curled up together on the bass as Midoriya gave to her the childhood she more than deserved. When she began yawning, Izuku smiled and told her they would continue the story the night following. Eri responded with 3 words before she passed out, but they were 3 words strong enough to get Izuku blushing like mad and almost not sleep that night. Thank you, Daddy. It caught him off guard. Of everything he expected to hear from her, that was not it. But as he sat there, beside Eri, snuggled up in his lap for the night, his surprise turned into happiness, his gaping mouth into a smile, his wide eyes into tears, and his stomach into butterflies. Those words dug into his heart deeper than anything All Might has ever told him. Blinking back into the present, Izuku smiled back. Good morning, Eri, Midoriya spoke softly. How did you sleep? I slept good. Eri let out a giggle and drew out the last word as Izuku pet her hair. Can we continue the story now? I don't want to wait for tonight. Izuku's smile grew at how bright and happy she looked. Eri was open to him. While she shied away and hid from almost the whole rest of the world, Eri would always be unrestrained when alone with her new papa and even sometimes her uncle. Izuku thought back to the night before, racking his brain to remember where they left off. They had already covered Izuku meeting and training with All Might, the start of school at Yuei, the USJ attack, the sports festival, Stain, the battle at camp. Oh, right. Just last night Izuku had given her a diluted retelling of the big fight between All Might and All for One, ending with the torch moving on to his successor. Now, he just had to figure out how to phrase the events that followed. Sorry, Eri, but you'll have to wait for tonight to hear the rest. Izuku patted and ruffled Eri's hair, enticing her to giggle from the actions. But Daddy, she couldn't hold back the giggling in her voice. It's Eri. Izuku looked back over his shoulder at his clock, which did confirm her words. It was a Saturday. Then we'll just have to find something to go together. You get to have me the whole day. Just let me get dressed and I'll find something for the two of us to do today. Izuku lowered his hands to her sides and began tickling her, just to get her to laugh and smile more, before pulling himself off the bed to change. Izuku had changed, and he realized it. He still had troubles with strangers and speaking up. His mumbling under his breath and hand never went away. And hell if he had gotten any better at talking to and being around girls. But Izuku was more open in himself when he was with Eri. He acted in a way that surprised even himself, but he took it all in stride and tried his hardest to do it all right. And that included being a father to Eri when his had been absent from his life. As Izuku picked out a fresh change of clothes, and Eri busied herself by playing with a doll he had gotten for her, he checked his phone. He looked at the news, at updates of heroes and their accomplishments, and he noticed a message hidden in the sea of notifications. One for his whole class. From the principal. Greeting, students of 1A. It is I, the one who no one knows if I'm a dog, rat, mole, or maybe even a genetically engineered human looking like an animal in disguise, your principal. Yep, this is from him, Midoriya thought with a chuckle. I do not wish to alarm any of you with my announcement. I bring good news. The Hero Association is sending a representative over from the Hero's Personal Affairs Department. He or she has been given only the information we possess and what else they could find, and are coming tomorrow to meet with you all and give you pro tips to help you live and move forward as heroes. Midoriya blinked at that, before his eyes widened and his hands shook. The Hero Association, sending someone to meet with the students tomorrow, to discuss their futures. Midoriya knew of the department, but he had no idea they sent someone to Yuei. Was this new? Was every class getting a chat from the department? What are they going to tell and ask him when they arrive? Pushing forward, Izuku did his best to steel himself and continue reading the message, his brain still on fire. It is a Yuei tradition to have someone from their department come over and help our students moving into their second year with us. Oh, so it was common. Pro heroes have lives outside of just being a hero. And the Hero Association brings it upon themselves to help straighten out the lives of our aspiring students and hero students all around the world. Fear not, for these men and women are here to keep the Justice Society together and help even those whose job it is to help. By 10 a.m. tomorrow, their representative should arrive to give all of you helpful advice in living while being the next generation of heroes. I do hope you cooperate with them. Izuku took long, shaking breaths, trying to calm himself as he read on. He chuckled softly as he realized the principal had ended every sentence with an exclamation point, if only to calm himself down. He closed his phone as the message ended with a sign-off from their principal and quickly changed into his day clothes. Looking back at Eri, Midoriya smiled and watched her play with the doll, reenacting the sparring match he had with Kirishima last week, which ended with an apology and apply driver, in that order. Hey, Eri, Midoriya spoke, walking over to her and joining her on the bed. Do you want to come downstairs with me and get breakfast or wait here for me? Eri stopped playing and looked up at Izuku for a moment, before her expression changed and she lowered her gaze. I'll wait here. Izuku knew what was troubling here. It was a conversation they had before, off of what Eri had heard from Izuku when he was talking with his friends. She thought she was being a bother and getting in his way of spending time with them, and almost broke down again if it wasn't for how fast Izuku had stopped her and told her nothing was wrong. He spent a whole day telling her and proving to her that he appreciated her in his life, and even if he was spending less time with his classmates, there was nothing wrong with that when it was all to make her happy and give her a home and family. Midoriya leaned down and planted a kiss on her head to bring the smiles and giggles back as fast as they had vanished. That's fine, Eri. I'll make sure to be right back for you then. While I go get us our breakfast, you are going to get dressed, and while we eat we'll check in with a certain someone and see if he wants to join us for an afternoon out. Eri's head snapped back up, her eyes meeting his, as the water that had begun to form evaporated and was replaced by blinding happiness. You mean Uncle Mirio? Izuku chuckled, watching her expression change from secluded to bubbly in seconds. Yes, Uncle Mirio. Maybe he has the time in his schedule today to join us for some fun. Does that sound good? Yes. Izuku laughed more as Eri fell back into the bed and bounced on the mattress, throwing her hands into the air. Yeah, good, now get dressed. I'll be back with food in a bit. Once more Izuku planted a kiss on Eri's head before heading out the room and down into the kitchen. Izuku was surprised to find the common area and kitchen as empty as they were for a weekend morning. His classmates could usually be found chatting it up and trying to watch something on TV, or hustle around one another trying to get their food and have something to eat, but not this time. Maybe they're just asleep still, thought Midoriya. or they're freaking out about the message Principal Nezu sent us. As he entered the kitchen, Midoriya dived through the pantry and fished out a loaf of bread with the sticker on it that said, in big green letter, ERI. He took out 4 slices and prepped them in the toaster, and stood by the sink as he waited for them to return as toast. Labeling the food as Eri's was actually Ida's idea. Some of his classmates would borrow food from one another, but he found no one would dare take anything with Eri's name on it. Not only was it a way to keep her food safe without hiding it in their room, but Ida offered the belief that it would help their class see Eri as another member of their extended family with one another, while they waited for Eri to open up to them. Despite the struggle, albeit worth it, to get Eri to trust his classmates, Izuku was grateful for how patient they were with the two. Aside from Bakugo constantly saying he doesn't care about the girl, all of them were considerate about Eri and what she needed. The walls weren't exactly soundproof, so when Izuku and Eri were playing in their room, anyone who passed by could hear how the young girl acted when she wasn't shy. But that also meant they could hear her when she cried. Sometimes she cried when they were outside and arguing, or sometimes it would just be because of a nightmare, and no matter what, if anyone was outside the door, all talk would cease. Some would walk away and continue their chatter somewhere else, and some would come knocking to check on the two, to no avail other than Midoriya responding on the other side that he could handle it, which he does. But Midoriya thinks his friends are too good for him, too kind, and lax over his negligence of them ever since they returned home. They had told him already that they understood it was for the sake of Eri, what he was doing, but to him it still felt as though he was betraying the relationships he had built with his new friends. He cared for Eri more than anyone, and he was grateful to finally have friends, but now he was choosing one over the other, and the choice had become Eri. He didn't think it was something he should regret, but, "Good morning, Midoriya." Izuku only slightly screamed and jumped in sync with the toast as Ida spoke up behind him. His engine-legged friend was dressed in his tracksuit, and judging from the sweat, towel, and water bottle, Izuku guessed he had just returned from a morning run. Hey Ada, Midoriya spoke softly in response, moving back to the toaster and prepping breakfast. "I didn't hear you come over here. Why, you surprised me." "My apologies. I had just finished my run and came over here to hear you mutter to yourself again." Izuku blushed and nodded absent-mindedly as he spread the butter on the toast. I was. Tenya." Ida nodded. "You were," the taller student confirmed. "I couldn't make out what you were saying though. Is everything all right? You look troubled." "Huh." Izuku turned to face his friend, with his mouth dropping slightly. "I do. My eye's not really that troubled, though. But something is troubling you." Ada made quick work to hear what Izuku had failed to deny, causing the green-haired teen to scoff at himself mentally. "A bit," he begrudgingly admitted. Before he could give Ada more time to respond, Izuku spoke again. "Have you seen the message the principal sent us this morning?" Ada squinted at Izuku as the shorter of the two rushed through his question. Izuku really didn't want to share his thoughts right now, or ever, and he thanked whichever god above took pity upon him and had Ida drop their first conversation and move on with the new question. "Yes, I read it this morning before I went out. I had no idea this was something Yuei, or the Hero Association did with aspiring heroes, but I am interested in hearing what they have to say. How do you think the conversation with them is going to go down? It's a Sunday, and they'll be coming to our dorm building specifically, which means we're either going to have a group meeting in the common lounge or they'll have us meet one-on-one privately, maybe even inside our rooms. I'm just worried about what they have to tell me." Izuku only jumped a few feet as Ida clapped his hand on his friend's shoulder. "You should have nothing to worry about, Midoriya." Izuku looked up to his friend to see the soft smile sent his way. "I doubt there is anything bad or troublesome they would have to tell someone like you. I assume they'll most likely give you tips and contacts that will help you grow up and be able to take care of Eri as you both grow, if she is to continue staying in your care." Izuku nodded again, thinking over his friend's words before lingering on Eri's name. Izuku let out a sound that he wasn't even sure of what it was, as he turned back to the counter and grabbed the plate of toast. "Sorry, Ida, but I have to hurry upstairs and give Eri her breakfast." Before Ida could assure him it was all right, Izuku had rushed past and up the stairs back to his room and his daughter. Izuku could make out a faint chuckle and a joke about their speed as he hurried away from his friend. Izuku chuckled as Eri sat upon his shoulders, holding onto his head gently, awing and making cute noises as they passed by shop after shop. Izuku decided to take her down a new street, treat her to some new sights and stores they haven't visited yet, which would help him know what Eri liked and what he could buy to surprise her with his presence down the line. "What do you think, Eri?" Izuku brought up a hand to hers, which were wrapped around his head and gently pressing against his forehead. "Their signs are so bright and pretty," Izuku could hear her mutter atop his head, earning her another chuckle from him. She wasn't wrong. A lot of the stores down this road did have neon signs and creative posters to market their products, appliances, toys, and such. Though he couldn't look up, he would bet there were stars in Eri's eyes to match her voice's awe and appreciation. Are there any you want to go into? Izuku could look beside him, to the taller gentleman walking beside them, a hand behind Eri's back to help keep her steady as her body twisted and turned atop Izuku's. Midoriya gave a smile to Togata Mirio's way, and was rewarded with one from said man. The blonde was overjoyed to be invited on another stroll with the two younger figures and provide them the company and friendship that he could. Eri twisted left and right, darting her head, trying to decide on a store to go to first. That one, Izuku felt his body tilt as Eri threw her weight with her arm to a store on their right, and thanked Mirio for catching him before he could fall or catch himself. Izuku followed the path of the finger barely visible in the top of his sights, pointing at the bookstore at the corner. You want to find something to add to your little collection? Yes, Daddy. Both the boys smiled as she did and led the way with her cheering and playing with Izuku's hair. Lucky for them, the door was big enough that Eri could stay on Izuku's shoulders as they entered and walked down the aisles until they found what the young girl wanted. She acted as she did outside, looking at the covers until she found one she was interested in and would reach out for. This was something Izuku noticed about Eri's behavior. They were in public, but even then that didn't stop Eri from being open and loud and giddy and cute. It was focus that seemed to be a trigger, focus on her that made her uncomfortable around Izuku's class when they tried to mingle, and the lack of focus that made it easier for Eri to be out in the town alone with Izuku. It was focus of large crowds that scared her, and focus of the individual she trusted that let her feel safe and secure. There was an exception to this rule, an outlier in the equation, and that outlier was Mirio. Only recently had he fully recovered and allowed to leave the hospital, and even more recent had he been visiting Izuku and Eri. When Izuku had to attend classes, he had a hard time finding a place for Eri to stay, so she wasn't left alone in his dorm for hours. So, while Mirio was trying to transition into a new life, with new goals and expectations, he had offered to give Eri company, and it was greatly appreciated by both Izuku and Eri that he did so. Now that his powers were gone, Mirio could no longer pursue the life of a superhero, so he had to find something new to do with his life. The school board of Yuei was working and helping him find that something. Teaching and police work seemed to be the main two attractions to the blonde teen. But he was still only in the middle of searching for a place to study them. Izuku hefted Eri off his shoulders and lowered her onto her feet as they found her something to read, which she pulled off the shelf and began diving her nose into the second she could. Izuku crouched down beside her, and Mirio sat beside him as the three enjoyed their time together, reading and watching the young one read. Mirio, Izuku began, turning his head away from Eri as she flipped through page after page. Did you get a visit from the Hero's Personal Affairs Department from the Hero Association when you were in your first year? Yep. Mirio smiled and gave Eri a small pat on the head to make her giggle. Despite their name, they do help with some heroics work too. They helped me come up with the idea of my costume, using my hair fibers to let it move with me as I passed through surfaces, though their offer was more centric on my everyday clothes too, when I would be unable to put on the uniform or during times when I wasn't purposefully roaming as a hero. Suit application came after that. Really? Izuku gave Mirio his wide eyes following that claim. I assure you, they were a very helpful department to help me move forward. Why do you ask? Are you expecting to meet them soon? Yeah, tomorrow, actually. Izuku scratched the back of his neck, stretching slightly to ease the tension he was feeling in it. It's a bit short of a notice, but we were told someone would be here tomorrow. Well, you don't have to worry. There isn't anything you need to do or know in advance. They'll do most of the talking anyways. Mirio stopped talking as Eri walked over to him and placed the comic in his lap before moving on to another one. If anything, they'll most likely give you ideas of work, other heroes to align with in the field, places for new internships in the future, and more likely than not, help with raising Eri. Izuku smiled softly, turning his gaze back to the little girl as she read through another comic. I think that last one is something I need more than anything. It's going to be tough to try and get her into a school for her age grade. She still doesn't fully trust the rest of my class, the teachers, or even my mom. I can't just risk pushing her into a new crowd of people she doesn't know before she gets comfortable with the one already around her. What about homeschooling? Izuku chuckled a bit at that question, before blushing at the look Mirio was giving him. I tried that, or really getting what I needed to do that, but I've come up short getting it done for her. I don't have the time to balance Yuei work, hero work, and teaching her all in one day. Timetable doesn't fit. The two boys sat in silence, mulling their words over as Eri moved to the third book. Maybe I could teach her, then. Izuku gave wide eyes to Mirio again, wincing slightly at the whiplash he gave his neck doing so. I'm still school hunting anyways, trying to figure out what I want to do now. And since I already watch over her for you while you're in class, I could spend that time teaching her what she would have to know already for students her age until I find a new school to go to. Izuku blinked as Mirio smiled back. The cogs in Midoriya's head slowly began to turn as he thought over Mirio's words, before smiling like a madman and tackling Mirio in a hug. almost knocking him into the shelf beside them. That would be great. Midoriya kept his voice as low as he could hold it, the excitement in his words trying to raise the volume. If you can do that, I would love for you to, Mirio. Thanks, buddy. Mirio gave a soft hug back, patting Izuku in the process. Guess I gotta go out and get myself the stuff I need to teach her then. Izuku opened his mouth to speak but cut himself off as a third body pressed against them. Izuku turned his head to see Eri, smiled and laughing, trying to join the two students into a group hug, which Izuku was more than happy to pull her into the middle. She giggled more and snuggled between the two boys. What are we doing? Izuku and Mirio laughed, leaning down to press their foreheads gently against her head and together. She only smiled and laughed and let them play with her hair. Planning with Mirio, Izuku whispered to her, doing his best to lower his voice after laughing louder than he thought he would. He and I came up with an idea of what you two will be doing when I'm in class. He's agreed to teach you a few things and help you know more. A bit similar to what I'm taught in my classes, but more for someone of your age. I'll need a week to get everything I need. Then, I can get to teaching you a few things you'll need to know. Mirio gave Eri a small pat on the head. I'll make sure we have fun doing so. The three of them continued to talk about what Mirio should be teaching her before moving on to the books Eri was getting that day, and bought them on their way out. Izuku pointed out a book to Mirio, one he remembered seeing with one of his teachers, and though it was meant as a joke, the once hero bought it anyways. Teaching for Dummies wouldn't be a bad addition to his shelf. Eri yawned and grasped at the air towards Izuku. He smiled and picked her up, carrying her back to the room. She could have walked back to the room on her own 2 feet, holding Izuku's hand all the way. She'd done it before. And Izuku thought it was a good thing for her to do every now and again to feel more open and in control when moving around the dorm building like his classmate. But Izuku wouldn't turn down the offer to hold her close and help her feel safe. Whenever, wherever. He locked the door to their room as they entered, and laid her down gently on the bed, tucking her in and getting her situated for the night. As he climbed in beside her, Eri scooted closer and snuggled against his side. Can we continue the story, Daddy? She questioned softly, allowing another yawn to escape her lips. Izuku smiled and used his thumb to brush her hair out of her face. Of course, Eri. He told her softly, spending a few seconds to recall where they left off. Wrapping an arm around the young girl and holding her gently beside him, he began the next chapter of the story. After the hero had defeated his arch-nemesis, he had confessed to the world his secrets, and then went from home to home of the arising heroes, talking with their families to reassure them that they would all be kept safe. One by one, he visited their home, their families, and them, the soon-to-be's, until finally, he visited the home of his protege. He lived with only his mother. When the hero and she talked, she expressed her issues and distrust immediately. She did not believe the hero and those around him were fit to keep her son safe. Time and time again, there had been dangers, and her son had been thrusted into the middle of it all. The mother saw the heroes as people she could not trust to protect her son, and believed it best to move him away from the heroes to a place where he would be safe and still train how he had to become the next hero. Izuku stared at the ceiling, visualizing that day in his head. It hit him like a truck, or one of All Might's punches, the words and feelings his mother expressed to both him and his idol. Her concern was something he had pushed far back in his head, never once taking it into consideration how she felt after each and every time he had hurt himself doing what he did. He never once thought of how hard it was on her, to see her son come home in bandages and cuts and bruises, to hear that his hands were broken, or his legs were, and there was a chance that one day they wouldn't be usable anymore, and that would be it. The son responded his mind, what he felt, what he wanted, and it did something to the hero. Something in him clicked, and he again spoke to the family of two. Izuku rubbed Eri's back, and he could feel her nuzzle against him. He apologized for the troubles that he and the other heroes had brought upon them, and their inability to prevent the ones that followed after the other. He expressed his thoughts and hopes for the young boy in front of him, and what he could see in the boy, what he could and will become in the hero's eyes. And he swore an oath to the family of two, begging for the mother for the permission to continue teaching him and raising him to be the next hero. A small sound came from Eri, and Izuku looked down to the girl nuzzling against him, asleep and breathing softly against his shirt. As he gazed upon her, he could hear All Might's words playing out in his head and embedding themselves in his heart. Even if it costs my life, I will protect and nurture her. Izuku tilted his head down and gave Eri's head a small kiss and closed his eyes with her, letting sleep overtake him and draw him into the realm of dreams. Today, it was Eri who woke him up. Izuku groaned as the little girl bounced on his chest, doing the job of his alarm. Daddy, Daddy, wake up, I'm up, I'm up. Izuku did his best to grab Eri and hold her against him as he sat up in bed with a grunt. What's up? He asked her softly, petting her hair. A direction. Izuku couldn't hold back a laugh from how serious she was with her answer. I see you're getting ready for Mirio's teaching already. He gave her hair a ruffling, eliciting giggles from the young girl. But that isn't what I meant. What is it you need, Eri? It's an Ende. Eri shook and nuzzled against Izuku's chest. She was right. The two had agreed only a week ago to make their Sundays their Endes, where they got to spend time in the room together, watch shows, draw, read, and let it be a day only to themselves. Eri doesn't have to go out and interact with anyone, just so she could feel nothing but comfortable in Izuku's presence. Midoriya smiled and kissed the top of her head softly. Yes it is, Eri. I must stay. Shall I go get you some breakfast first? Izuku held back his yawn as Eri nodded vigorously. Yes please. Thank you Daddy. Eri gave him a wide grin and a big hug to boot. And Izuku responded with a soft one of each of his own. All right then, you wait here, and I'll be right back with some food. Izuku lifted her off gently, setting her down on his desk chair as he grabbed a change of clothes. He changed into them quickly, and giving Eri a peck on the forehead he headed down to make breakfast again for the two of them. And today, there were actually people in the lounge. Not everyone, but more than there was the day before, even if it was only 5. The word is pleasant. Kirishima read off the green card. Zero hummed and shuffled through his red cards. Are we supposed to be ironic or serious? He asked Kirishima, pushing his cards together until only 2 stood alone. Ooh, either or. If you can make me laugh enough with it, good. If not, I'll choose the serious one. So in other words, play whatever. Mina paraphrased, setting a card down in front of the red hero. As long as it isn't crap. Yeah. Thank you, Bakugo, for the added commentary that we didn't need but was informal nonetheless. Fuck off. Izuku smiled as walked past his classmates without greeting them. Bakugo was the only one to notice him make his way to the kitchen and only acknowledged him with a grunt before slouching down more and returning his focus to the game. Midoriya worked quietly, stealing some of his own food from the fridge and prepping it before putting it in the microwave. No matter how quiet he tried to be, the ding sounds of the microwave could not be muffled. Oh, mornin' Midoriya. The green-haired hero turned back to the common area, giving a slight greeting and getting other friendly greeting in response. Good morning Kirishima, Zero, mine, Jiru, Kaken. Fuck you. Who's winning? Izuku chose to let Bakugo's greeting slide and decided to actually make conversation until he had to go. I am, Mina told him cheerily. Already got 3, and I'm right behind you with 2. Kirishima picked the 4 cards played out in front of him and shuffled them in his hands. Whether it surprises you or now, Bakugo doesn't have one yet. Keep talking like that and I'm going to kill you. What are your plans for the day, Midoriya? The microwave dinged and Izuku took out the bowl, replacing it with another and starting the process again. Eri and I are just gonna hang out today. Oh, that's sweet. Kirishima looked down at the cards and prepared to read them, before stopping himself and looking back up at his classmate. That reminds me, I didn't see you yesterday. Where were you? I knocked on your door but you didn't respond, so I'm assuming you weren't here. I took Eri out into town with Mirio, decided to show her some new places, and even bought her a few new books and clothes while we were there. The microwave dinged again, and Izuku took out the second bowl before digging around the utensils cabinet. How is Eri doing, by the way? Mina turned around to watch Midoriya as he searched for what he needed. She's doing all right. Great, even, but she still has her nervousness when she's confronted by someone else, so, as long as she's happy, that's good. Zero collapsed his hand of cards and faced Midoriya as well. What do you think that affairs person is going to say to us? Midoriya froze as he picked out 2 pair of chopsticks. The hero's personal affairs department was sending someone over today, and he had completely forgotten about it, and he didn't even tell Eri about it yesterday, either. He sighed and dropped his head into his hand. Hopefully, the meeting would go by fast enough so he could Eri the day she wanted, and he promised. Midoriya took a deep breath through his nose and took the breakfast in both hands, 1 cup in each. Don't know yet was all Midoriya responded with before walking back upstairs quickly with his head hanging down. 4 of the 5 sitting at the table watched Midoriya rush away from them up the steps. Did I say something wrong? Zero questioned, frowning as he drummed his fingers on the table. No you didn't, stop that. Jiru flicked her ear jack at Zero's hand to stop the tapping. You didn't say anything wrong. He probably just worried they'll say something about Eri. Oh yeah, that's a good point. Kirishima nodded as he spoke. He is a bit young to have a child in his care, officially. Maybe he's worried they'll move her to a new family. But didn't Midori say his mom is her legal parent now? Mina brought up. Technically, Eri would be in her care then. And if she had to stay with Midoriya's mom, he could just move back in and live with them for her sake. Well, that's true, but I don't think Midoriya wants to do that. He's smart, and if he wanted to do that, I think he would have come to that consensus by now. I think he's basically taken the role as Eri's legal guardian in his mother's place. Are you two using big words on purpose? Kirishima and Mina turned their heads to face Zero with their questioning stares. I don't remember the last time you two used those words, if you even have before. You guys don't usually talk like this. Hey, I can use big words if I want to. Kirishima responded with a huff and air quotes to mock Zero's choice of words. I'm not an idiot. All right, Midoriya and Ida and Momo use them all the time, so why can't I? You are the farthest person from being like Yaoyorozu I have ever seen. Hey, Bakugo shot up from his seat, feet spread apart in a deep and aggressive stance, and his fingers curling inwards by his sides ready to guide explosions at the nearest target. Sweet fucking Christ. Nobody fucking cares about Deku and his daughter or your low as shit IQ. Just read the damn cards already. Hey, first of all, I have a decent IQ. And second, try not to yell so loudly. Don't want another incident with Eri like last time, do we? Kirishima's voice got quieter as he spoke more towards the booming hero. A growl came deep from Bakugo's throat as he glared at Kirishima. The two stared each other down before Bakugo scoffed and sat back down, clutching the armrests with an iron grip. Fine, he spat out. Just read the cards already, you soulless redhead. Hey, and you fucking tell me not to yell. Jesus Christ. Izuku smiled as Eri drummed her hands on his knees, sitting in his lap as they watched a video on his computer and sang along. While she was less than pleased that their day was going to be interrupted soon, she didn't complain. She was worried at the idea they would talk about her, and Izuku held similar worries, but he assured her that the talk would be nothing but beneficial on her behalf. Izuku pet her hair softly and gently tapped a finger on her singular horn, making her giggle and squirm from the ticklish feeling. He had no idea why she had one, in comparison to none like him or two since it wasn't centered on her head, but assumed it must have come from her birth parent having their own. It stood out from the rest of Eri's looks, or it did to him, but Eri would at times become self-conscious of her horn and the attention his classmates had brought upon it, probably in regard to her past as Izuku could only assume. And Izuku always told her she looked cute with it, and that no one meant her any harm. Eri leaned forward in Izuku's lap and moved the cursor on the screen, clicking to another video as the current one ended. As the new one began, Eri leaned back and nuzzled against Izuku's stomach, and Izuku wrapped his arms around Eri to hug her gently. He smiled and lifted Eri slightly up his torso, leaning his head down and kisses the top of her head. Happy? It was a simple question, but Izuku didn't feel the need to elongate it any more than that. Was the almost hummed response Eri gave him. Her eyes stayed glued to the screen as she cuddled in Izuku's arms. What are we gonna do for lunch, Daddy? Well, first of all, we just had breakfast so you'll have to wait a little longer. Izuku poked the sides of Eri's stomach to get her giggling. If you're hungry right now, I'll let you snack on something. No meal just yet. But as for what lunch could be, it depends on what you want to eat. I could make us something here or I can order us something to be brought here. Whichever you'd prefer. Eri looked up to Izuku and opened her mouth to speak but was interrupted by a knock on the door. With a small eep, Eri jumped in surprise, and Izuku hugged her tighter to both calm her down and keep her from colliding with his chin. Eri squirmed in his arms, and the more she did the more violent she got, so Izuku loosened his grip to let her turn around to face him. She dived against him, hands gripping the chest of his shirt and face pressed against his chest so only the corner of her eye could see the door. She wasn't anywhere near terrified, but the shivering was enough to tell Izuku to hug her tightly again. It's unlocked, Midoriya called out, head tilted down towards Eri's and twisted at the neck to face his bedroom door. As it opened, Eri clenched tighter to Izuku's shirt, and he tightened his hug before the face of Denki Kaminari peeked into the room. Hey Midoriya, Kaminari greeted before adding on a smile. Hey Eri. Eri looked back with the one available eye, nodding her head only slightly as her greeting. Hey Kaminari, Izuku responded. What can I help you with? Denki turned his attention to Izuku, and the one-for-all wielder could feel Eri's grip loosen by a millimeter. The guy from the Heroes Association is here, down in the lounge area. He's wanting to make sure the whole class is present in the building, asking us to come down. Izuku stared blankly at his classmate before remembering the message from yesterday and nodding his head. Alright, I'll be down there in a second. Thanks, no problem. Denki's eyes darted from Izuku to Eri for a moment before he gave a wave to the two and walked away, closing the door as he did so. Izuku looked down to the girl in his lap, who was hiding her face in his chest. He leaned his head down and gave a soft kiss to the top of her head, petting her hair softly as he did so. I have to go down now, Izuku told her. Eri curled down into his lap, and Izuku curled around her. You don't have to come down if you don't want to. You can stay in here and watch if you'd rather, okay. Eri spoke softly in response, but she did nod her head. Are you hungry still? I'll grab you a snack real quick if you'd like. A shake of her head. You sure? A nod. Izuku rested his face in her hair. I'll do what I can to get him to talk with me first, so I can give you the day I promised you, alright. I just do this one thing, and then the two of us can continue everything together. Promise? Izuku pecked her head again. Promise. Eri shuffled in his lap, and Izuku straightened out, letting her move off his and onto the bed to face the computer screen again. Izuku climbed off the bed and stretched out his body before turning back to the little girl and surprising her with a hug. I love you, Eri. She did nothing at first, but after a while, she twisted her body towards him and hugged back. I love you too, Daddy. Izuku smiled as he saw a smile, small but real, appear on Eri's face. He gave her a soft squeeze in the hug before letting go. I'll be right back. I promise. He ruffled her hair slightly and gave her another smile before walking out and leaving the door open just a bit. Even if she didn't want to come down, he wasn't going to give her the feeling of being locked in by herself at a time like this. Now the lounge was packed with people. Almost everyone was downstairs, bar a few noticeable absences that Midoriya noted. Most of his classmates were piled around the couches, and a few more in the kitchenette. The most notable presences were that of Ida and Todoroki by the front door, accompanied by a suited man that Midoriya didn't recognize, and who was probably the person the Heroes Association sent over to the school. He didn't look anything special, but if he were to guess, Izuku thought it was probably his quirk was more internal-based, maybe even similar to the principal's. Ida looked to be the one leading the conversation, and once he stopped talking about whatever it was he was talking about, the man turned his head and body, gazing about the room before his eyes landed on Midoriya. He made no gesture, wave or smiles or anything of the sort, but his gaze lingered before continuing on through the room. Then he spoke, just a bit louder than everyone else. Is this everyone? His voice drew the attention of most, except Jiru, who looked back towards Midoriya, and said Midoriya, who turned to look back up the steps just in time to catch Denki as he came stumbling down. The electric hero let out a nervous laugh as he got back on his own feet. Thanks, Midoriya. He scratched the back of his head to accompany his laugh and mood. You're a lifesaver. The two boys turned their attention to the new man, along with the rest of their class. Thank you for going around and getting everyone, Mr. Kaminari. Is this everyone who is here today? I notice a few faces are missing. The man opened a binder in his hands, one Midoriya didn't notice until now, and looked down at one of the pages he opened to. No, everyone is here, but it's just that Uraraka, Yuei, and Minda are all up in their rooms, finishing something or other real quickly. They said they'll be down soon. All right. Well, since there isn't much that I am required to say beforehand, I'll tell them when I have to meet with them. The man cleared his throat to assure that all attention was on him. First, allow me to introduce myself. I am Mr. Chain from the Hero's Personal Affairs Department, but you already know the latter. It is custom for the association to send someone to the Hero School and meet with the freshman classes in both high school and again in college. While I am meeting with all of you, colleagues of mine will be meeting with your other freshman classes to talk about similar things, depending on their emphasis. For my branch and focus today, it is my job to help upcoming heroes into the new world and assist them during their lives as such. Mr. Chain looked around the common space at the students until his eyes rested on the hand raised in the back. Yes, Midoriya. A few heads turned to look back at the green-haired hero. And though he flinched slightly at their gazes, he continued on with his goal and lowered his arm. One of the third years told me. Or at least your department did, you helped them in designing their hero attire. Doesn't that fall a bit out of your department's focus? The suited man hummed and regained attention. Somewhat, yes, he admitted. But we do try to help heroes regardless anyways. While the heroic work isn't our focus, there are times we will mix in our main work with theirs. Another hand shot up, and Mr. Chain nodded to them. Sorry if this sounds a bit rude. Hagakure started as her floating clove lowered. But why was the department created? Most heroes don't really live doubles lives. The lives of heroes, and who they are usually open to the public, aren't they? Yes, many are open to the public with their lives, but not everyone is. Take All Might for example. For decades he worked under a mask we couldn't see, and lived a life separate from being a hero. Almost no one knew of it, and it was something the public never suspected. But he has his reasons for doing it. His hiding was justified. It is our job, my job, to assist you in that second life, if you choose to live one and if you choose to live that life in secret. A few students nodded their head in understanding, and Ada himself seemed to be the most worked up of the bunch following that explanation. Now, onto the meetings themselves, if there aren't any more questions. Mr. Chain looked around the room to see no hands raised. There will be one-on-one meetings with each of you, with me. If it is all right with you, we can use your rooms for the meetings, since this building doesn't have a designated room for that and I'd rather not have to take you away from your rooms and plans on a weekend. Oh right, Mr. Kaminari, since Yuei is still not present, can you run up to her and tell her she is the third meeting I have scheduled, and ask her if she is all right with using her room for the meeting? As Kaminari nodded and made his way back up the steps, Midoriya sulked in his spot. It seemed as though the man had an order to who he wanted to meet with. Although he didn't know the list, Midoriya didn't believe he would be anywhere high on it. Maybe he could talk with him real quick and try to make it work that he could have their meeting done earlier. Alright, Izuku Midoriya, you're up first. ... or not. Izuku blinked as he heard his name called out, staring at Mr. Chain with a hint of disbelief before nodding slowly. You have a child who lives with you, correct? Eri Midoriya, as she now goes by legally, lives in the dorms with you instead of back home with the missus, your mother. But it seems she and the school have given these circumstances the green light, so there's no need to fight that ruling. Is she here today? Why yes. Midoriya gestured up the stairs. She's back in our room. Mr. Chain nodded and gestured to the door behind him. Would you mind stepping outside with me for our meeting, then? While the request was odd in his eyes in the back of his mind, Midoriya nodded again and made his way around the room, avoiding his classmates as he approached the representative. Mr. Chain opened the door but stopped a step short from leaving. He pulled a paper out from his binder and handed it to the class president still beside him. This is the list of the order of the meetings, he explained to Ida, but loud enough so everyone else could hear him. You're all welcome to give it a once-over and see where you are in the order. Should give you an idea of the time you have to work out any last preparations before we meet with one another. Thank you all for your time today. With that, he walked out the door, and Izuku followed behind him. Todoroki watched Midoriya and Mr. Chain as they took huddles just steps away from the building's entrance, as Ida read over the timesheet and walked over to the group in the common area. I wonder how he decided to order this. The engine quirk user voiced his thoughts. The order seems a bit strange. I thought it would be in class number order. Zero extended an arm in Ida's direction and took the list after he had given it a look over. Maybe it's by class standings then. Then shouldn't Yaoyorozu be first served? Mina countered Zero's guess. Good point. Zero's eyes dropped from one line to the next, dragging a finger along with his gaze. But I am on the list where I think I would be. I'll only believe this isn't class standings because Bakugo is higher up. You got something to say to my face. Duct tape. Jiru snatched the list from Zero as he tried to hide behind the crouch from Bakugo's rage. Yeah, I can't think of why he ordered it like this, unless our understanding of the class grades are wrong. I wonder how Midoriya got first and, hell, Todoroki, you're up second. Todoroki turned his attention away from the window and towards his classmates. Maybe it is heroics work then. His job is to help heroes' lives outside of being a hero, so maybe it's a priority list on who's been more active than others in the field of heroics. But why the hell would that fucker go first? Bakugo turned his attention away from Zero and jabbed a thumb towards Midoriya as he spoke. The raid they got Eri from. Heads turned in the direction of Ida. He was at the front of the fight during it all. Meet Chisaki face to face. Maybe that's why. Jiru handed Mina the list and took her leave back upstairs. But what about Uraraka, Tsuyu and Kirishima? The pink-skinned girl darted her eyes up and down the list. They should be high up too then. But Yura is only 6th and Tsu and Kiri aren't even top 10. Jiru stopped halfway up the steps and turned her head back in the direction of her class, and in doing so, was not given the time to react as Denki came tumbling down the stairs into her and sent them both down to the bottom. Watch where you're going, you idiot. Jiru yelled at him as she pushed him off and poked him in the eye with one of her ear jacks. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Don't stab my eyes. Hey. The soft voice beside his ear made Todoroki jump away from the source, only to see the floating clothes of Hagakure beside him, facing out the window. I think something's wrong with Midori. Todoroki gave her a look before turning his attention back out the window to his classmate and the department representative. And true to her words, something was wrong. Izuku Midoriya was having a panic attack. At least that's what Todoroki was calling his friend's actions. Izuku's eyes were wide, his mouth, when he wasn't talking, was agape, and when he was talking Todoroki could hear how high a volume his voice was at. It wasn't audible and clear to make out, but it was loud enough that Shoto could make out the unease and fear to it. He looked mortified, and Todoroki didn't know why. What do you mean? Ida questioned as he stood up and made his way to the window to see for himself. Midoriya is freaking out, Hagakure answered. I don't know why, but he doesn't look too good. And it doesn't look like Mr. Chain is having an easy time helping Midori. He looks troubled too. And I can't tell as he's helping enough to calm Midori down. What could he have said that would have Midoriya acting like this? No one had an answer for that. And Todoroki grew more concerned for his friend as he and Mr. Chain tried to work out the situation between them. Ida watched through the window to his friend, as he slowly gained his bearings and sat down in the grass, while Mr. Chain stayed on his feet. The man looked down on Midoriya with what seemed to be pity as he continued speaking, pulling papers out of his binder and handing them to the boy. Ida could see Midoriya's lips move, but only in small bursts, while Mr. Chain's moved more and led the conversation they were still having. If these weren't one-on-one meetings, I wouldn't mind one bit being by Midoriya's side right about now. Todoroki nodded in agreement. The two outside continued to talk until eventually it looked as though neither of them were. Mr. Chain shuffled through the pages of his binder as the two stood and sat in silence, before he pulled out a smaller, colored sheet of paper from one of the pages. He crouched down and handed the paper to Midoriya, and spoke some more. Though still visibly shaken, Midoriya's eyes widened in surprise and awe in response to Mr. Chain's words. He nodded when the man finished talking, and spoke words of his own, and he picked himself off the grass. The two came walking back to the building, but as Mr. Chain took pause in the common area after entering, Midoriya walked past him and the rest of his class through the room. Midoriya, Ida called out to him. He had hoped to talk with the shorter of the two and find out what was wrong so he could offer help, but Midoriya just kept on walking. Where are you going? What's run? I'll tell you later, Izuku interrupted as he went up the stairs. I have to go. Jiro made the motion to try and stop him, but ceased all efforts as the boy passed her up the steps and kept on going. Mr. Chain looked around the room at the students before settling his sights on the few by the window, looking in the direction of their classmate. He made no attempt to call them out, but he did turn his body to face them. Shoto Todoroki, it looks like you're next on the list. Shoto turned his attention to the man in the room. Would you like to meet outside as well, or would you rather conduct the meeting in your room? Todoroki spared his class a glance out of the corner of his eye and hesitated before responding. My room will be fine. Mr. Chain nodded and followed Todoroki to the elevator, stopping only to ask Denki for Yaoyorozu's response. Izuku steadied his breath as he climbed up the steps to his room. The papers in his hands shifted, so he pressed the bottom edges to his stomach and shuffled them back together before continuing. His mind was lost to the words Mr. Chain has shared with him. The information about Eri was easy to stomach, and the ideas for how to move forward as her father were welcomed, but the rest was concerning. To a large extent, it wasn't the last thing in the world he wanted to hear, but since none of the others were said, it was the worst thing to hear. Izuku couldn't believe that his ears heard it right to begin with. He thought he would know himself better than anyone, and that he would have thought of this about himself long ago, but he didn't, and he was nothing other than surprised to the soul when he heard those words. Izuku was broken out of his thoughts as he collided with someone, sending him back and almost down a flight of stairs if he wasn't fast enough to catch himself first. He clutched his papers to his chest and looked up to see who he ran into and apologized and Uraraka. Sorry about that, Uraraka, Izuku apologized, bowing as he did so. It's okay, Deku. Uraraka herself was blushing slightly as she rubbed the back of her head nervously. I wasn't looking where I was going either. I had the meeting on my mind and Izuku noted Uraraka's face switch from nervous to blank. What's wrong, Uraraka? Deku you're crying. Huh, he wasn't crying, Izuku was sure of that. He would have noticed if he was. He blinked in confusion at her claim and then he could feel the tears in his eyes. He must have really been distracted not to notice that. Oh, Izuku raised an arm to wipe away the tears he didn't remember coming from his eyes. I didn't notice. Sorry about that. And for running into you. Izuku's words were lost in his throat as Uraraka was against him again, this time in the form of a hug. Uraraka, it's okay, Deku. Izuku could hear her soft voice beside his ear, along with the heat of her breath. He couldn't help himself from blushing at how close she was. I'm here to listen. So is Ida. And Todoroki. You have friends here if you need someone to talk to. Uraraka. Izuku didn't cry. He was checking this time. He didn't want to worry her more by doing so, seeing as she was worried enough to start hugging him. Thank you, but I can't talk about it right now. Why not? It's just very jarring new to receive, given it's been around since I signed up for admission to Yuei and it's only the first time hearing about it. I'm not ready to talk about it yet. Izuku let his free arm fall and returned the hug Uraraka was giving. I promise I'll tell you some other time. Maybe soon, but not right now. I need some time. I'm sorry. You're crying, Deku. You have nothing to apologize for. Izuku chuckled slightly. He didn't really believe those words, but everything she did was sweet. Too sweet for him. Not even for worrying you. No apologizing. All right. The two stood still in their ever-silent growing hug. Thank you for this, but I need to go to Eri right now. Oh, okay. She sounded sad in her reply, but she still let go and stepped back to look him in the eyes, keeping her hands on his arms. Is she okay? Yes, she's fine. I promised a Sunday just for the two of her and I, but the hero's personal affairs representative meeting kinda interrupted that, and I have to head home to my mom now too, so. Oh, you already met with them? Yeah, and I was the first person he wanted to talk to. Izuku scratched the side of his head. Weird, huh? Is that why you were crying? The smile Izuku was trying to muster faded away. Yes, are you sure you don't want to talk about it now? Izuku let a sigh out his nose. Not yet. I promise you and Ida I'll tell you both in the future what it's about, but not right now. Uraraka pouted, probably due to having to wait to find out what was wrong. But she just sighed it away. Fine, I won't press you for it, but I expect you to keep your promise in return. Izuku nodded. I will. Uraraka smiled at him, and he was able to smile back. Most everyone is downstairs in the lounge. There is a list of the order to the meetings, if you're curious to know when yours should be. Really? Good, I'll go take a look at it then. As she walked past Izuku, she looked over her shoulder to him. Tell Eri I say I and good luck. Izuku watched Uraraka descend down the stairs before letting out a breath he had been holding in. Izuku really did have friends better than he could ever imagine. They were almost too good for someone like him. He made his way to his room, opening the door slowly to reveal the figure of Eri dancing on his bed to the music on the computer. He smiled at the sight and let out a laugh as the young girl jumped into his arms. "Welcome back, Daddy." Eri giggles and hugged Izuku by the neck to keep herself from falling out as he carried her with one arm and used the other to put the papers face down on his desk. "Hey Eri, I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long." The little girl shook her head and hit Izuku in the face with her hair. He recoiled in good nature and shook his own head to send her hair off his face. "Nope, now we can spend the Sunday together." Izuku could hear the smile on his face break away at her words. "Eri, HM." The little girl looked up to Izuku as his voice changed tone. "We won't be spending Sunday here." Eri stared back at Izuku as he spoke, and he could see the mirth in her eyes dissipate, so he worked fast and continued talking. "We will be spending it together back home with Mom. Something came up in the meeting and it's made me. I have to go home and talk with her about something, and I can't leave you here, and I promised you a day together so we can spend it together in my old room while we're there after we're done talking. If he's available, maybe Uncle Toshi can drive us over and pick us up some lunch on the way there too if you want. And if you're alright with spending the day over there, it means you could have a big dinner at the end of the day, if that sounds good to you." Izuku could see that Eri was struggling with all the words Izuku had thrown her way, and he sighed and kissed her forehead softly. "I know I promised you a Sunday to ourselves and things keep coming in the way of it, but this is important stuff. I want to give you the day I promised you. I'm sorry today has been going the way it has." Eri frowned, and Izuku worried he had been the cause of it and made her sad. But she leaned forward into his chest and hugged him tighter. "It's okay, Daddy. I understand. Thank you." Izuku leaned his face into her hair and breathed softly against her scalp. "I love you, Eri." "I love you too, Daddy." The two stood still in their little hug before Izuku lifted his head. "Now, let's grab you some things to bring and see if Uncle Toshi is around to drive us over." Izuku ran a hand through Eri's hair as she rested over his lap. He kept his eyes out the window instead of on her all night, instead choosing to watch the buildings they passed. His morning was stressful, or at least the meeting was stressful, and everything since then had been less than great. Every second he had Eri by his side was soothing and helped more than he thought it would. But it didn't change the news he had been given. All Might too struggled with the news, and to find peace in this situation back when Izuku explained what was going on, but he had still done what he could to calm down Midoriya when he freaked out about it again. Was the Hero Association really that worried? They had been holding back information for months that was the type that should have been brought forward immediately. If it had come forth months ago, his mom would have pulled him out of Yuei for it. Why wasn't she, of all people, told about this before? If it was anyone else, would their family have been told immediately? Did anyone else even show signs for the association to be concerned over? "You're muttering again, young Midoriya." Izuku blinked and blushed as he looked forward into the rearview mirror, and into the eyes of his idol, looking back at him with concern. Midoriya lowered his head as he continued to comb Eri's hair. "Sorry, All Might," he apologized weakly. He could hear his mentor sigh from the driver's seat. "Don't apologize, Midoriya. It's a part of you. No reason to say sorry when it's no harm. What troubles you?" Izuku blinked and cupped his other hand gently on the top of Eri's head. "Sorry, bad question. Of course I know what's troubling you. What's going through your mind right now, my boy?" "It's the same thing, All Might." Toshinori Yagi spared a glance in the mirror back to his protege. I don't know what to do right now." "You push forward. You've done it time and time again. I know you can push through this too. I have faith in that. But you've never gone through this." Toshinori squinted his eyes and raised an eyebrow when looked into the reflection of Midoriya. "You've fought villains and helped civilians and saved them, and I've learned to do that from you. You've gone through being quirkless, and so have I. You've been teaching me to take your place as the symbol of peace, and I've had you for guidance through everything, but this isn't something you've had to deal with before. Even with the amount you've pushed yourself to save everyone, you haven't been put." "Midoriya." Izuku closed his mouth and raised his head back up to look into the eyes of his mentor. "My boy, I think you have a skewed perspective on what I've been teaching and training you for. I want you to take my place, not my personality." Toshinori let out a weak laugh at his attempt to lighten the mood, but only succeed in coughing on his hands. "Look, Midoriya, it is true that I have been training you to replace me as the symbol of peace. I haven't stopped that. You've shown your worth many times to me that this is something you deserve. But you shouldn't be telling yourself to become me. That's never what I've meant. You are different from me in many ways already, and have done things I wouldn't have ever done or did when I was your age. You've mastered one for all in ways I never even dreamed of when I was training to wield it. Even when your classmates are pinned against you as enemies, you've exhausted your strength to help them with the problems that have weighed down on their shoulders for years in a matter of minutes." As they came upon a red light, Toshinori took the opening to turn around in his seat to face Midoriya directly. "And you've done what I never did and took a child into your care," he added, nodding to the sleeping girl. Midoriya followed his gaze down to look at her too. "It's only been a month since she's been out of Chisaki's grasp and into your family's care, and she trusts you wholeheartedly. You've helped her in ways I've never. And that includes what you've confiscated in telling me since the day I met you. You've done enough to define yourself as your own hero from me, Midoriya. Toshinori watched Izuku's shoulders slump as his hands worked Eri's hair behind her ears. This isn't the end of the world, my boy. I can promise you that. You're strong, you're brave, you're smart, and you've taken place as her father figure. You've proved me and so many others wrong on how we first thought of you, and I know you can do it again. Here. The hardest part is behind us already. Now power through this too. For yourself, for your mother and your friends, and for little Eri. Izuku gulped and strained his neck as he looked up to All Might with tears forming in his eyes. He struggled for a moment on what to say before his eyes widened, looking past the hero. Green light. Huh. Toshinori turned away from Izuku to see the car in front of them moving away. Oh, right. Thank you, Midoriya. Izuku nodded and raised an arm to wipe away his tears, and hid the small smile of gratitude forming from his lips. All Might was right on so much. Izuku turned his head below his arm and looked down at the stack of papers beside him that Mr. Chain had given to him. On the top of them all was the small blue sheet of paper that was given to Mr. Chain to be given to him. He reached over and picked it up, lingering his eyes on the words and numbers before grabbing his phone from his pocket and typing them in. Midoriya, may I ask you something? It is not about the meeting or news, so don't worry about that. Sure. What is it? When did Eri start calling you daddy? Izuku froze his finger over his phone after he confirmed what he'd typed, and Toshinori smiled back at him in the rearview mirror. You seemed really comfortable when she said it earlier, so I assume it isn't a relatively new occurrence. Izuku flushed as he remembered the ever-so-slight detail that he had not shared this revolutionary change with his mentor, who instead found out from experience of being present when it happened. Or his classmates, some of who found out about it in the same way before the whole news reached everyone in his class. Or Mirio, who found out instead when he was watching over Eri for Izuku and she had called him such when they brought the hero student into conversation. Or his mom, who still didn't know. My God. Midoriya lowered his head as he began to process the fact that the two parental figures in his life, one of which was by blood, did not know that Izuku was being referred to as a parental figure as well. It's only really important information he probably should have shared with them earlier, but he never did. Even with every conversation he's had with them between then, neither of them were told about this. 2 weeks, Izuku muttered his answer. It was still clear enough for All Might to hear it, and he showed that he did when his head made a motion back into the head cushion of his seat. She's been calling you this for 2 weeks and I'm only hearing about this now. Izuku turned his head to face the window once more and scratched at his cheek. Well, you never asked. Toshinori laughed, luckily not spilling blood this time around. I most certainly did ask. You asked how she was doing. And that would include you telling me any new developments to her secluded nature. Her being open and comfortable around you enough to think of you as her father counts. Have you been holding this information to yourself for 2 whole weeks? Izuku nodded sheepishly. It didn't feel right to just say it out at random. Fair enough, but that still doesn't stop my curiosity. Toshinori looked back to his student in the mirror. Did you at least tell your mother? The lack of response and physical showing of lowering his head was an answer enough for the hero. Toshinori sighed as he continued driving the three of them. It must mean a lot to you that she calls you her father if you haven't shared this with your mother and I. That makes you sound like my dad. Now, Toshinori let out a choke of a sound. Not you too. I have enough to deal with. Present Mike joking about me being a father to your whole class. I don't need you turning on me and agreeing with him. Dad might is not something I need floating around to boost Mike's ego. Izuku let out a small laugh of his own, but the two found their conversation interrupted by a yawn coming from the young girl in Izuku's lap. Midoriya looked down at Eri as she stretched her body and opened her eyes. Hey, Eri, did you sleep well? Eri turned her head to look up at Izuku, only taking in his form and ignoring their vehicle surroundings. Yes, Daddy. Daddy, what's wrong? Eri pushed herself up gently and had her body facing Izuku as she stood up. Izuku blinked at her and could feel the tears still present on his face. Oh, right. Izuku smiled down at her and wrapped her in a one-armed hug. It's fine, Eri. Nothing's wrong. They're happy tears, not sad tears. I promise. Eri hugged back, and Izuku wondered if she believed him. Uncle Toshi and I were talking, and he was just helping me feel better. Izuku turned his head to face his mentor, looking back at him while still facing forward. Thank you, All Might. Toshinori nodded and smiled back at him. It's no trouble, my boy. Helping is all in a day's work, especially for you. And speaking of you, the car slowed down and turned slightly as the hero parked it against the curb. We're home. Izuku looked out the window to see apartment complex beside them and nodded solemnly, rubbing Eri's back with his hand. Now it was time to see his mother. Welcome home, Izuku. Midoriya let out a grunt and hugged his mother with his free arm as she hugged him. Hey Mom, sorry for calling you and coming home on such a short notice. It's fine. You can come home whenever you like, remember that. Midoriya released her son and crouched down to the young girl beside him. Welcome home, Eri. Eri was positioned so she was facing Midoriya with her whole body, with one hand holding his and another wrapped around his front gripping his shirt. She didn't flinch away as she faced her, only gripping Izuku tighter. Hi Auntie Inko. Inko smiled and reached a hand out to Eri to pet her. The little girl closed her eyes and leaned her head slightly in the direction of Inko to let her do so. Still calling me that, sweetie? Well, she calls me Uncle Toshi, so it isn't too far-fetched, All Might interrupted as he took off his coat and hung it up by the door. She calls Mirio the same, so I think it's something to be happy about, Izuku quipped to his mentor, turning his head to face the older man as he did so. I feel honored that she thinks so highly of me. If she thought any greater of you, she could be calling you Father Toshi, or even better, Dad Might, Inko joked as she stood back up, only to find herself confused as Izuku choked back a laugh and Toshinori threw his head back with a groan. The world must be my new greatest foe, for it has done nothing but transpired against me. Inko turned to her son for an explanation, and he shared with her what All Might has shared with him in the car. The mother shared a giggle with her son. It's not an awful name, All Might. You can just call me Mr. Yagi, Mrs. Midoriya. And you're right, it's not an awful name, just not one I'm willing to accept if it means I have 20 kids under my wings to deal with forever. Toshinori stepped closer and placed a hand on Izuku's head. Any more than this kid gives me and I might have a heart attack from all the stress. Izuku squinted his eyes at his idol, but turned his attention away to look down at the little girl tugging at his shirt and bringing All Might's gaze down with him. The symbol of peace frowned as he thought before turning his mouth into a straight line again. Young Midoriya, why don't you and Eri go to your old room? You told me you promised her a day for her to have you, right? Why don't you get a start on that? I'll have the talk with your mother. Izuku looked back up to his teacher with a questioning gaze, but didn't question as he saw the expression All Might gave him in return. He looked back down to Eri, and could tell he heard All Might, if the big, pleading eyes were any indication. Izuku looked to his mother last. Is it all right if Eri and I go to my room? Inko smiled and waved a hand dismissively. Of course, Izuku. You two go have fun, okay? Oh, and are any of you hungry? I can cook us some lunch if you'd like. It's all right, Mom. Eri was getting hungry as we left, so we picked her something up on the way here. Thank you, though. Izuku hugged his mom again and shared an I love you too with her before picking up Eri and carrying her over to the room. Izuku breathed softly in her hair as he opened the door and lifted her over to the bed. He moved to lie her down, but she wouldn't let go, so he opted to instead lie down with her. She made no complaints about that, snuggling against Izuku in happiness. What would you like to do now, Eri? Izuku spoke softly as he rubbed her back. We could watch something, I could read you a story, we could draw, whatever. You get to choose. I want to draw. Eri's muffled response came from against his chest. All right. Do you already have an idea in mind? Eri nodded but said nothing, so Izuku guessed she just wanted to keep it a surprise. He got off the bed and went to his desk, pulling out papers and pens for the two of them to use, happy to see them where he left them. He placed them out separately on his desk and picked Eri off his bed, moving her into his desk chair so she had a more solid surface to draw on. As she took the pen in hand, Izuku sat down at the edge of his bed and faced the table. He took a pen in hand and positioned the paper in front of him, and just stared at the blank sheet as he tapped his fingers on his pen. He couldn't think of what to draw, until he looked up, and he knew just what to put down. Izuku started with her hair first, or really the outline of it. They had yet to take her to get a haircut, so it had kept growing down her body and legs. He was hoping to take her to get one soon, but a stranger and a pair of scissors isn't a good combination for Eri to trust right away. In due time, with the outline of her hair done, he worked slowly on the shape of her head and dress, doing his best to keep the proportions in line with the hair outline. When the two pieces were shaped as close as they could be to even, he drew her arms and legs and her little unique horn, and then added the smaller details. Her eyes, her nose, her mouth, her shoes, the flowers of her dress, the frills that decorated each opening in it for her head, arms, and legs. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than most of his hero journal drawings. He stared down at his drawing of her, at the little floral pattern of the dress he got her, at her long white hair reaching just above her knees, at the small smile he drew her lips in. He frowned, not because of how it looked, but because his mind had gone right back to the meeting with Mr. Chain, because it affected Eri. Izuku would never in a million years tell her what Mr. Chain told him. That isn't something he wanted her to know about, ever. He felt awful just telling All Might about it, that he couldn't even begin to think of how his mother or classmates would react if they knew, and how awful and heart-wrenching Eri's reaction would be if she found out. He didn't want to worry her, or make her sad, or make her cry, or anything like that. He wanted to see her happy, to see her smile, and never let her lose that. Daddy. And when he looked up to her, he saw just that. Eri, sitting in his chair, smiling and kicking her legs as her arms crossed over her drawing to hide the big surprise to come. This is what he wanted Eri to have forever. Yes, Eri. Did you finish drawing? She nodded. Ready to show me? She nodded again and stood beside her to see it. Eri lifted her arms off her piece of art, and Izuku would fight anyone who said she wasn't the most precious little girl in the world. He could see the rough yet cute drawings she had done of his mom, All Might when he's skinny, and Mirio, all placed at different edges on the paper with the nicknames she had for them resting below their feet. At the center of the page stood two other figures. The shorter of the two had long hair and a spike coming out of her head, and Izuku could read the word below it, me. The taller one has two big ears on the top of its head, resembling that of a bunny, and Izuku could see her writing of Daddy below the feet. He smiles at her drawings, but couldn't help tearing up at what she had wrote at the bottom of the paper. Daddy. Eri had turned to see his reaction only to find him cry. Daddy, what's wrong? And nothing wrong, Izuku said as he worked on balancing his voice and keep it from cracking. He crouched down and wrapped both his arms around her in a hug. I love your drawing, Eri. It's wonderful. He felt Eri wrap her arms around his neck as he continued to stare at the work she had done and the words she had written. Family. This is what he wanted to protect. This is what he wanted her to have, and to never lose. After all she had been through, she deserved to have one, and he'd be damned if he let anyone take that away from her. He planted a kiss on the top of her head. I love you, Eri. I love you too, Daddy. As the two stood in the hug, something came into Izuku's mind. Something from not too long ago. Something he remembered telling himself but that he didn't seem to follow enough. He almost laughed at the irony of it, but he knew those words meant everything, now more than ever. In order to save others, in order to give Eri a family, I first gotta keep myself safe. Toshinori watched Izuku carry Eri away with a returning frown, and kept his gaze on the boy's door even after it had closed and locked the two children away. He knew Izuku's mind lingered on the discussion he and Mr. Chain had in the morning. He knew Izuku was worried, even scared, by the information, and for many reasons was it justified. Izuku had Eri listen to music to distract her and keep her calm and happy as the young boy shared with All Might the information he had been given earlier in the day. And he had made it abundantly clear with his teacher to never let Eri find out about it. She didn't need to know, not now, and hopefully not ever. People knowing about it was one worry on its own, separate from Eri knowing, and the latter was possibly his biggest fear. Toshinori knew it pained Izuku to lie to her, but the two agreed that now was not the time for her to know and worry and fret and never let Izuku go the way he had promised her. She's really attached to Izuku still. Toshinori jumped as Inko broke him from his thoughts. He was lucky her back was to his as he did so. It's sweet to see them get along so well. It's probably because Izuku spoils her, Toshinori explained. There isn't a day that goes by when Izuku is in class I don't hear him, or hear about him, saying something or dedicating time to write and think about Eri and what he can do for her. She's as important in his mind and heart as his dream of being a hero. The words ending his sentence were a strain in his throat to speak. This is my fault. Inko turned and smiles at Toshinori. That's good to hear. I'm happy that they're so close after just a month. Her smile faltered for a moment. Toshinori could see it, but it didn't fade away. So what do you want to talk to me about? Izuku said he had something to say when he called, but he said it was best not to do on the phone. Toshinori hesitated, and his mind darted for a bit before he found something to say. One thing to add to Eri and Izuku's relationship. He began, looking hesitantly at the woman before him. You didn't know that Eri calls Izuku Daddy, did you? The smile and joy that were taped to Inko's face fell off and replaced with a look of shock and surprise. She does. Yes, I found out about it earlier today. Apparently all the time they've spent together was enough for her to start calling him such. And he likes it, too. He's been withholding this information from us for 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Toshinori let out a chuckle and a nod. That's how I felt. And it probably explains why she calls you auntie instead of mom, too. I think it's a wonderful thing for her to call him. It looks to be helping him a lot. Wow, I didn't know. It is nice, I think, that she loves Izuku so much, so I guess I can't complain. Inko's head turned to look at the bedroom door of her son over her shoulder before turning back to the hero. Is that all there is to tell me? Toshinori sighed as he turned his head away and looked down at the stack of papers on the table. The small paper on top caught his eye and he picked it up, giving it a once-over before turning back to face Izuku's mother. Would you mind if we sit for this? Toshinori gestured to the table as he questioned. And upon Inko's agreement the two took their seats across from one another. Inko stared at Toshinori, waiting for him to speak, but the hero was distracted with a blue slip of paper in his hand. He appeared to be judging it intently, and that only worried her more. What's wrong? Her voice, once again, broke Toshinori from his thoughts as he looked up to the woman across from him. Oh, my apologies, Toshinori spoke in a hurry. It's nothing. Just, young Midoriya let me read these earlier when he talked with me about it, so I know what they all say, but he didn't show me this one. What is it? Toshinori turned the paper in his hand at her request to show Inko the name and phone number written on it in what looked to be English. I don't recognize the name, but it's probably someone the Hero Association wants Izuku to speak with. I can only wonder what she would have to share with him. It's an American girl's name, I believe, but it isn't of someone I recognize. Maybe she's another counselor or teacher they think will be of help to Izuku. Toshinori looked down at the rest of the papers and blinked. Speaking of which, did Midoriya tell you about the meeting he had this morning? He mentioned something about it on the phone, but he didn't really say it was about. It's a mandatory one Yuei has with the Hero Association, and with most hero schools all over the globe. They send someone from their hero's personal affairs division to meet with hero freshmen across the world. They help students and offer help to students that are soon to be heroes regarding their lives outside of heroics, managing or hiding. The association has a lot of help to give. Most of what they told Izuku this morning was regarding Eri and the care of her. Toshinori took apart the pile of papers and handed about half of them to the mother. They're proud in his efforts and actions in choosing to let Eri live not only with his family, but with him in his dorms for direct attention and care during the school year since he still hasn't moved back here. A lot of that involves housing and education details. Though Izuku told me he and Mirio were starting to work out on homeschooling Eri before they send her to a school around people she didn't know. Apparently it's a decision they came to yesterday. Inko took a second to look away from the stack of papers she had begun reading. Who? She questioned, giving All Might a look that mirrored her words as the papers were spread out in front of her. Oh, right. You two never did meet in person, have you? I thought you would have by now, but it's all right. Togata Mirio was with Izuku when they first met and then later saved Eri. They were both interns under Nighteye for the time being. He was hospitalized for a while following the raid. He's a good lad. You'd love to meet him. I think I remember Izuku telling me about him before. Isn't he watching over Eri now, when Izuku is in class? Yes, that's the one, Toshinori nodded. Mirio had lost in Quirk in battle. He's at the moment searching for a new school to attend, for a new career, since Yuei can no longer teach him their heroic courses the way they have been now that he no longer has his quirk. But he has agreed to keep Eri company when Izuku can't be with her. She's quite fond of him as well. Toshinori looked back down at the papers and felt his features drop as he remembered where the conversation had to go. Miss Midoriya. Inko is fine, Mr. Yagi. Toshinori looked back up into Inko's eyes. Then Toshinori or Toshi will be fine, too. The look he was giving her scared Inko. It looked angry and sad and lost and hollow and unlike everything she had seen in his eyes before. Toshi, were you aware that Izuku was almost put on suicide watch? Inko froze and gaped at the question, looking in disbelief at the symbol of peace, whose eyes lost any sign of light as she lacked a verbal response. I thought not. It doesn't state in here that they informed any family members of Izuku, but I could still hope. What? Toshinori could hear the crack and pain in her voice without having to look up at her reaction to know it. Izuku was put on suicide watch. When? Why? He wasn't put on it. He was almost put on it. The Hero Association had decided against putting him on the list for the time being, since they don't have any sufficient evidence anymore to say that Izuku is indeed suicidal. But why? Inko's voice rose as she spoke up. And what do you mean, anymore? Why would they think of putting Izuku on a suicide watch? What did he do? Toshinori sighed again, unable to look into her eyes. It's my fault. They had almost put him on the list since the day he applied to attend Yuei. A quirkless boy, going to attend a school for people with quirks, where the entrance exam for the heroics departments is a brawl against giant metal robots. The association was going to file him away after the exam had ended, until he had shown off his quirk. They tried to find what information they could as to how he had a quirk at all, and had come to the understanding that his had developed late, before he had applied for Yuei, and it was failed to be noted and registered under his official papers. But Izuku isn't suicidal. Inko has risen from the chair to follow her voice's volume. They thought he was. Kid, no quirk, fighting robots with basic teenage strength. Adding to that the death threats and suicidal comments he had received in the past. Izuku wasn't given the benefit of the doubt. Someone told my son to kill himself. The association says this is something they had only found out recently. When they were looking for any last bit of information they thought they still needed to attain before the meeting. There isn't a name given to the person or people who had told him it, though. Toshinori couldn't find the strength to raise his head and look his in the eyes on this one. They stayed fixated on the papers below him. It was all he could bear to look at, even if it too pained him. A mistake I had caused. Why am I only hearing of this now? They thought about putting him on suicide watch months ago, and only now do I find out. And you said it yourself, they don't think that anymore, so why is it being brought up again? Why wasn't I told of this directly? They no longer believe him to be suicidal, but they do believe Midoriya lacks the self-preservation to stay alive. Inko's steadily rising anger froze as Toshinori found strength in the pain to look up at her, instead of using his strength to free Uraraka during the entrance exam and get her to safety. He fights the giant robot and breaks 3 of his limbs. He breaks his arm again and takes a full blast from Bakugo head-on during a training exercise. He charged villains far more experienced than him when they attacked the USJ and broke his legs in doing so. He tore both his arms and a leg in his fight against Todoroki. One it seemed he threw on purpose with his actions. He charges head-on into battle with the hero killer, nearly breaks every one of his bones at the training lodge when villains attack. And not even 48 hours after that does he decide to head back off into the face of danger to save Bakugo from the League of Villains as heroes were executing a raid to bring an end to their actions. And most recently, he drives his body beyond the brink during the Nighteye raid in a full battle with Chisaki. The Hero Association doesn't believe Midoriya wants to die, but they don't believe he takes his own life into matter when he acts as a hero, and that he could lose it if he isn't careful. Inko lowered herself back into the chair slowly as the words All Might directed at her began sinking in. Izuku, her own son, not having the will to live. She didn't believe that to be the case at all. But the longer the list went on, the worse her worry became. Had he really risked his own life that much in such a short amount of time? Izuku has hurt himself too many times for the Hero Association to not be concerned. They thought it was best to voice their thoughts now that he has a child under his direct care. They want to be certain that he is trying his hardest to stay alive. For his family, for his friends, for himself, and for Eri most of all. And Izuku thought it best you heard of it as soon as you could, so he told me about it and I drove him here and now you know. Toshinori's voice faded as his eyes dropped to the center of the table. It's my fault. Inko's head snapped to look at the symbol of peace as he spoke solemnly. Toshi, what are you talking about? How in the world could this be your fault? You don't encourage Izuku to hurt himself. One of the first things I told the boy when I met him was that pro heroes are always risking their lives on the field of battle. But this isn't what I meant. Toshinori's hands came up and cupped his forehead. This isn't at all what I had meant. That's not your fault, Inko exclaimed. Izuku adores you, All Might. I don't think he would take your words like that. He told me earlier that he thought all the training he had gone through, that I had put him through, was to make him me, but I don't want him to become me. I want to see him become better, and I have been. Izuku took my actions and tried to copy them, and I don't want him to do the same with my words if this is what becomes of it all. If all my time spent with the boy was just wasting his life away. Toshi, All Might finally rose his head to meet Inko's eyes, to find the same mixed look on her that he had given earlier. Izuku would never think of your words like that, of his time with you like that. You've been a tremendous help in person to him all his life, and even more so ever since he met you. You're the symbol of peace. He could never think of your actions as something that was only taking away his life. He wouldn't think of it like that. Not for me, not for Eri, and certainly not for you. Toshinori stared at her with a look on his face she couldn't quite place, and a voice broke out before either of the two could speak again. Mom, All Might. The two adults turned their heads to see Izuku, standing at the hallway entrance. Eri and I heard shouting. Is everything all right? The hero and the mother were like deer in headlights, unmoving in their chairs as they looked at Izuku in shock as he had appeared without any noise prior for warning. Izuku moved his eyes from the adults to the papers skewed across the table, and Toshinori saw his expression change from one of concern to one of disappointment, and he knew Izuku was thinking what he had. Mom, I'm... Izuku didn't get to say anything more as his mother tackled him in a hug. The family of two stumbled as Izuku was thrown off balance and worked to get back to it. His arms were crushed to his side by her arms. His body was hunched over to meet her in the hug, and on his shoulder he could feel and hear his mother crying. He couldn't make out all of her words, but he could hear and understand enough to know she was apologizing. Apologizing for him having to go through this whole mess. Apologizing for not noticing anything sooner. Apologizing for not doing enough to prevent it. Mom, Izuku tried getting her attention, but she continued to mumble her apologies against his shoulder. Mom, he squirmed his arms to push hers higher up, just enough so he could hug her back and curl into the hug more. Thank you. From that, Izuku could hear her words fade away slowly. Thank you for everything you've done for me, Mom. This isn't your fault, I promise. You've done so much for me already. There isn't any more I could ask from you. Thank you. Only one thing surprised Izuku more than his mom suddenly hugging him, and that was the hero in the room joining in on the hug, with one arm reaching behind Izuku and the other placed gently on his mother's shoulder. None of it is your fault either, Midoriya, he spoke, his eyes not meeting his student but instead looking beyond, over his head of green hair. You've been an outstanding hero already. I don't want to hear you apologize for the lives you've saved, even when it had cost you your better health. You did what you could every time to save every life that mattered in the moment. I'm proud of you. His hand slid up Izuku's back to rest atop his head. I'm sorry that when we first met, when I told you that heroes are always risking their lives in the line of duty. This isn't what I had meant by those words. I am sorry that I had misled you with them. Izuku shook his head, blinking away the small tears that had begun to form. I never thought of your words like that. I focused more on the need of power than the risk of life when we first met, so I'm sorry about that. I just haven't been thinking everything through like that. My mind has always been elsewhere at times when I need it. He took a breath through his nose, though it just sounded like a sniffle. But I promised to focus on keeping my life. I promise to try harder to not hurt myself so much, and stay around for you both, and for Eri. The hand on his head lowered again and pulled the body it was attached to closer into the hug. Pressure on his lower back pushed Izuku slightly more into the hug, and he turned his head mostly and body somewhat to see Eri behind him, hugging him and pressing against his back. She looked up at him, one hand clutching his shirt and the other a sheet of paper in hand, pressed to his other side. Izuku smiled and let his mother go slowly as she picked herself up, allowing him to turn around and crouch down to the girl. Hey, Eri, sorry for worrying you. Auntie and uncle are all right. They were just talking and getting really surprised, is all. Eri threw her arms around Izuku's neck in a hug, and Izuku wrapped his arms around her. You're crying again, Daddy. Eri's voice was soft, and Izuku could indeed feel tears trickling down his cheeks. He laughed softly, choking on air and hugging her tighter. They're happy tears, Eri. I'm happy, and I'm happy I have you. The fingers of one of his hands combed through her hair gently. I love you, Eri. I love you too. Izuku did sniffle, moving his arms lower on Eri so he could lift her up and stand up again. And I'm happy you do. Izuku took one of his hands back to wipe the tears off his face and brushed his neck against the paper in her hands. I see you brought it with you. Did you like the picture? Eri pulled away from Izuku's neck and brought her arm with the paper in front of him. Thank you, Daddy. It is not adorable. Izuku looked out of the corner of his eyes to his mentor and his mom, the former of which was directing the question to the latter. It is. Izuku wondered what the two of them were talking about, but then remembered he never did tell his mom directly what Eri had been calling him and blushed slightly. It looked like All Might had done that for him already. Hey, Eri, can Auntie and Uncle see the picture you drew? I bet you they'll love it as much as I did. The young girl hummed for a moment, lowering her head onto his shoulder before nodding slightly. Okay. Izuku turned his head slightly and tapped his nose to her forehead before looking at the two adults. Eri and I did some drawings in my room. Want to see them? Eri did a really cute one. Oh, really? I'd love to see it. Inko took her mood into a facelift and smiled, clapping her hands together and following her son to the room. I think I'd like to see it too, Toshinori spoke. Eri does seem to do amazing things already, so I can only assume her drawings are the same. Eri curled up against Izuku in embarrassment, but he could feel the smile against his shoulder. This was what he was fighting for. His mother and his idol behind him, supporting him, there to catch him if he fell and needed help. Eri in his arms, smiling, happy with the world and opening up more to the people around her that loved her. This is what he intended to keep. And Inko and All Might agreed to stand by him in that fight. Sunday, Katsuki Bakugo would never admit jack shit to anyone. Katsuki was a man, thought really he was a teen by age, of his pride. He knew what he could and couldn't do, but not once did he think that what he couldn't do made him weak. If he couldn't do it then, he would do it later, and day by day he would overcome each and every obstacle stacked against him. And he knew what there was for him to accomplish and overcome, what he himself had made his goals and what the rest of the world made for him. Katsuki himself made the goal to become the #1 hero in the world. All Might held that title for years, and only recently was it passed down to the ex-2 hero, Endeavor. But it mattered not to him who held that title before him, for he knew, one day, it would be his and there wasn't anyone in the world who could stop that from happening. Katsuki set his goal to become the most powerful hero there was, and that was just as possible an accomplishment as becoming #1. His powers were given to him when he was 4, and day after day his control and the power of his explosions only got better and stronger. And not only could he use them for raw power, but he knew how to push them beyond. Despite the look of a delinquent following him into his grade school, middle school, and first year of high school, he was far smarter than many of his peers. His brains and bronze helped him keep his position in the top of the class, if not on the border. No one could be anything without knowing how to be it, and Katsuki kept that in mind when he moved forward. It was the world that set the obstacle of knowing how to get by on more than just swinging about. It was a reality introduced when a sludge-formed villain tried to suffocate him. When his class at UA trained in a Hero V villain simulation in their first week of school, the world touched on it for a moment when he interned under Best Jeanist, and it slapped him in the face a second time when he took his 2 tests for his hero license. He had to give it his all and then some if he wanted to become a hero, and throwing a good punch was but a fraction of it all. It was the world that made it clear Katsuki how important one's presentation of her personality to the public was. A hero is one who protects those who, when they need it most, need protecting. When those people need someone to look up to cheer, to idolize, to believe in, to listen to when she would tell them everything was all right. Katsuki knew his voice didn't match the description, nor was the way he handles his emotions, but he could protect and instill some hope and security into those he protected, beating down villain after villain. Maybe not everyone felt what he did was best, but he knew he could only get better at it. And Katsuki alone set the challenge of treating other people like people. In the list of challenges he had to face, it was the second hardest to best. He knew he treated people like shit, He went all the way into high school without ever making a real friend. Sure, people followed him around, treated him better than most and all that, but not one of them was a friend, and he couldn't even recall their names. Just cheap nicknames based off their quirks. Kirishima was probably the closet person there was in his life to a friend. He was the first to treat him as lower than anyone else ever did, but at the same time looked to him as though he was a god and superstar of manliness or whatever the hell shitty hair was always on about. And Katsuki knew he was a bully. He knew that not only did he treat people as less, he would throw people down with his own two hands to ingrain in their hands the difference between them and himself. Whether it be with his fists, his words, or even his quirk, Katsuki was brutal in his methods in proving his superiority. But at the same time, Katsuki knew better than to take it too far. If you believe they're holding your quirk over in the next world, you should just dive off the rooftop. Katsuki blinked, giving a near-emotionless look to Mr. Chain as he spoke. The man in his suit tilted his head up, away from the papers in his lap, and looked into the teen's red eyes. Katsuki stared back in silence for moments on end, until he threw a questioning look onto his face and let out an "eh." Mr. Chain let out a sigh and patted the edge of his stack of papers. "You're familiar with these words, are you not, Mr. Bakugo?" the man questioned, using his own words to continue. Katsuki looked to the man with a solid line of a mouth and an eyebrow raised. "Why the hell do you ask?" he responded. Mr. Chain blinked once at the student before looking at his papers again. "I was assigned as the representative for your class to conduct these meetings. In the last 2 weeks before coming here, I've been going around interviewing past connections students had before coming to their hero schools. And just as Ejiro and Ashido went to school together and had people who knew them both, the same went for you and Midoriya." Katsuki kept his expression solid as Mr. Chain spoke, donning a faint frown as the green-haired hero in training was mentioned. "When I went looking, I was directed to 2 of your friends from middle school. The first of them I met with had nothing to say but praises about your quirk and your grades in the class. Heard you stayed top of your peers for 3 years straight. Congrats. But it was your second friends that had more to say." Chain flipped deeper into his notes. According to him, Midoriya was bullied in his class, being the only one around without a shown or formed quirk. Apparently a lot of it happened outside of school, but the one instance he had to note was one where Midoriya was told to commit suicide. "Now, while I wasn't given a name," Chain continued, closing his notes, "your friends did admit that you were present when those words were spoken to Midoriya. Is that correct?" Chain brought his eyes again to Katsuki, and the student kept the gaze between him and the adult. For a minute Katsuki sat in silence, playing that day out in his head. He remembered it, what brought those words on and everything that happened after it. If he remembered it for any other reason, it was his first day of being attacked by a villain and being in the presence of All Might not even 15 minutes apart from one another. But that line, that threat, stood out as its own day than a reason to remember one. "Yeah, I remember it," Katsuki admitted, stuffing his hands in the pockets of his jacket. "Gave the guy shit for saying it." Mr. Chain raised both eyebrows at Katsuki's statement. "It is all right to explain about that day in a bit more detail. And the person who said it, I didn't know him," Katsuki went on. "It was the first day I ever met the guy. Kept saying all this shit about wanting to be a hero, and then he goes on and picks on Deku and tells him to kill himself. And then he still tried to give people the idea he could be a hero. Kid ate shit for thinking that was acceptable." Mr. Chain said nothing directly after Katsuki finished, drumming his fingers along the papers in his lap. He took another look through his notes, brushing past each page and leaving Katsuki silent in his own seat, slouched down without care. "So," Katsuki blinked to acknowledge he was listening, "you don't know the person who threatened Midoriya? Never saw him a day after that? Fucker wasn't a part of our class, just some asshole going around trying to claim in superiority." Mr. Chain nodded, rubbing the papers between his fingertips. "You call Midoriya by his hero name?" he asked Katsuki, breaking off topic. The hero in training gave a scoff to start his response. "I've been calling his that since before he claimed it as his hero name. It's where he got it from." Katsuki flicked his head up and chin with it. "He's got me to thank for it." The man gave a breath of a laugh and a small smile to the teen before him. "And, pardon me for not knowing this beforehand, but what does Deku mean?" Katsuki kept his mouth shut at that, leaning his eyes back with the rest of his head to gaze at the ceiling above. His hands fiddled in his pockets and lips stayed pressed together as the word, the name, the title floated in his head before he turned back down to the Hero Association official to give him his answer. "It means I can do it. That's why he made it his hero name." Mr. Chain sat still across from Katsuki, his smile never shrinking or growing as Katsuki spoke, or when he finished speaking. Shortly after, though, it grew, and Mr. Chain let the weight of his smile pull his back in his seat. You know, Chain spoke softly, after I asked your middle school principal for the names of your friends, and then I asked for Midoriya's. The only name I was given was yours. I was told you were the only person he saw as a friend. I can see why. Katsuki sat in silence, giving no word, no look, and no action to the words Mr. Chain spoke. The official took in a breath of air in the silence and patted the notes on his lap. Shall we move on? Katsuki scoffed into his cup of milk, pouring another sip down his throat. He had decided on staying downstairs until A, curfew kicked in, or B, the 20th member of their class returned to the dorms after spending half the day home with his mother and legal sister-turned-daughter, whichever came first. Though Katsuki was certain he'd still be down in the open area until the latter happened, Katsuki acknowledged the 6 challenges placed in front of him. He knew how difficult it would be to outdo them all, to overcome each and every one, to prove his greatness. And he knew that the most challenging of them all was shitty fucking Deku. Deku wasn't just his own challenge, he was every challenge. The squirt was aiming to be the very best hero too, and he had both power and smarts to boot. And he'd shown how to use that power and turn it on its head, making it something more than just power, speed, and maneuverability to be specific. And he knew how to treat others and present himself as a figure to make people smile and believe. And to top it all off, he was the one Katsuki could never stop bullying. He was, day in and day out, the one who faced the physical and verbal abuse Katsuki laid out on him every single day of his life. But that didn't stop him, it couldn't stop Deku. It couldn't crush his dreams. It couldn't stop All Might from choosing him as a successor. It couldn't stop him from applying to Yuei, or him getting accepted. It couldn't stop him from proving himself time and time again that he could outsmart Katsuki, if not in battle then in the long run. It couldn't stop him from taking notes from Katsuki to improve his use of his quirk. It couldn't stop him from risking his life to save others, Katsuki's included. And it couldn't stop Izuku from getting his hero license, the same day Katsuki didn't get his. He hated the little shit. Katsuki would do everything in his power that he could to bring him down. And Deku, with all his might, would hold himself upright and strong through it all. All the fear, all the sorrow, all the hopelessness Bakugo put in Midoriya was spat out on the sidewalk and left to rot in the past. He was no longer the helpless, weak, crying bastard Katsuki remembered him to be. He had changed, he had grown, and useless Deku had become the hero, Deku. So Katsuki watched from the kitchen counter as Deku came in the front door, a sleeping child in his arms. It didn't take long for the green-haired student to notice his classmate watching him from afar. He looked unsure at the blonde's presence, but said nothing as he turned away and headed through the room to the stairs, in an attempt to avoid his childhood friend. Oi, Deku. Katsuki didn't shout. His voice didn't raise an octave. It sounded normal, and not for Katsuki's standards. The explosion quirk user took another sip of his milk as walked out of the kitchen and over to the still form of Izuku and child. The shorter student turned slowly as Katsuki stopped his approach in front of Deku. The two stood in silence and presence, one uneasy and the other unreadable. But that didn't stop the latter from talking. You're the only good challenge here. Izuku blinked in confusion at Katsuki's exclamation. As much as I loathe to say it, you're the only one of these fucks capable of proving yourself. Half and half has his dumb shit to sort out. Shitty hair is as dumb as the bricks he's made of, and round face yells more than she needs to. These extras can't dream to be any sort of challenge to you or me. Katsuki brought up his free head to jab a finger into Midoriya's forehead. Show me that head of yours still works and don't back out now, you got that shithead. Instead of Midoriya giving a response, it was the sound of a yawning Eri that followed Katsuki's speech. A young girl rubbed the sleep around her eyes as her head lifted itself from Izuku's shoulder. She gave her father figure a look in her tired state before turning more and noticing Katsuki in front of her daddy. She expectantly eeped and curled up against Izuku, away from Bakugo as much as she could. Hey Eri, Katsuki greeted softly. Eri curled her fingers around the frozen Izuku's shirt, letting out a small hum instead of words as a response. But Katsuki didn't pay it any mind. He understood enough not to fight it. Instead, he moved his hand over from head to hand, giving a slow and soft pat to the little girl's head. Sleep tight. Katsuki didn't wait for a response from the small family as he took his hand back and walking into the kitchen. He dropped his cup into the sink, stuffed his hands into his jacket, and made way past the two, up the stairs to the room for the night. Don't stay up too late, Deku. We got classes tomorrow. I don't need you drooling over my shoulder. Katsuki Bakugo would never admit jack shit to anyone. But Deku wasn't just anyone, and nothing he said could ever amount to just jack shit. One day, Izuku Midoriya didn't have problems sleeping. Yes, there were nights that took him longer than others to fall asleep. Yes, there were nights in the past where Izuku cried himself to sleep, be it because of the absent father, unsupportive mother, violent classmates, brutal kaken, or anything that made him feel like shit. And yes, there were nights he didn't sleep at all, when he pushed himself to do more and try harder and prove everyone and everything wrong about himself. Izuku just didn't see it as a problem to get sleep, so it didn't surprise him in the least when he was still awake, lying on his back and staring at the ceiling above, just unsure of too much. Izuku didn't know how to feel as Monday turned into Tuesday, as his clock was only 7 minutes away from doing. He didn't know how to feel about the people around him, and the arguments he had gotten in with them hours ago. Down was the most he could feel, but that wasn't even an emotion as far as he knew, just too general. Other thoughts continued to plague his mind, and with them varying emotions that set his judgment haywire and his body aching. He re-entered his classes as nervous as he had been when he was in his other schools. That disappointment from others when he didn't have a quirk turned to disappointment from others that he wouldn't share his problem. Guilt ate away at his lungs as Uraraka and Ida and Isui and Todoroki stepped up to talk with him, and the latter two only begrudgingly accepted that he wasn't comfortable enough to talk about it with anyone just yet. The former two refused to back down as easily, pushing into him for something until he snapped at them and turned them a cold shoulder the rest of the day, along with basically everyone else around him. He wasn't happy with the way he acted, but he wasn't alright with the two digging where they shouldn't when it just wasn't the time. Izuku didn't really know how unhappy he had been through the day until he came back to the dorms and to his room and was tackled by a short, giggle-happy girl and then a man who stood a foot above him. Mirio had kept to his promise on teaching Eri what a school would, and had spent the day with her introducing her to the subjects they would start with and playing some games that let her get a good understanding of what she would be learning when the next week started. Watching her smile and bounce with joy at seeing her daddy, and spending the day with her uncle cued Izuku in on how far his heart was dropping into his stomach. The shuffling by his side rolled Izuku's head in its direction, away from the bland ceiling to the sleeping child against him. Eri had stolen Izuku's hand and arm for herself, finding them a perfect fit as a pillow and something to hold as she slept. He found it cute how she pushed his fingers into a curl, cupping her head in his palm for security. He couldn't think of anything that defined the word precious better than she did. But despite the smile she could put on his face, Izuku had plenty to worry about her. One of his biggest concerns was how hard it was for her to make friends. She wasn't really shy, per se, nor did she truly embody afraid, at least not anymore. Izuku thought nervous best defined her attitude and actions towards others when trying to interact. She didn't know if she could trust people, new people especially, but she didn't give them the benefit of the doubt or just cry in their presence. She just did her best to avoid interaction altogether, keeping to Izuku and Mirio's arms instead. Yes, Uraraka, Tsuyu and Kirishima had all been present when the heroes raided the Yakuza's hideout, but Eri never got to meet them until they surrounded her with 16 other new faces. Not really the best first day, but Izuku didn't push his luck, or her. He promised that he would let her take time in opening up to others instead of forcing her into the uncomfortable. She agreed to it, and to the small deal to be open at least somewhat comfortably to the rest of his class within the next 6 months. Living with 20 people was familiar to her, but their attitudes differed from those who used to be around her. Bakugo still intimidated her. Takoyami and Dark Shadow unintentionally triggered flashbacks none of them wanted her to think about, and Minta unsettled everyone around him, but Eri promised to give them all a chance and open up to them, one day. And since he had the time on his hands, he decided to watch what slept in his hands. He watched her nuzzle into his hand, grip his arm for comfort, breathe softly into the sheets, shift deeper and deeper into the mattress and blankets, whimper through her snores until they were more audible, shook without being cold, and sweat without being hot, cry and mutter for him. Good feelings gone. Eri. Izuku kept his voice low for the people sleeping in the rooms around them, but still loud enough so his words reached those that matter. Eri, wake up. It's me. The hand below her took her head gingerly and moved her closer to him, and the one that came above cupped the other side of her face, brushing along her cheek to wipe away the tears in her sleep. He didn't shake her awake, just held her, whispered to her, pushed his words into her ears so they could pull her out of the nightmare. I'm right here, Eri. Daddy's here. While not the easiest thing in the world for him to say, he still said it because he knew it needed to be said. Eri. She didn't scream, she didn't shout, she didn't make any big actions when she gasped awake. Her eyes snapped open, sending a shock through the rest of her body that began to calm her down and pace her breath. She didn't look at Izuku, but past him, curling in slightly as the reality she was witnessing shifted to the truth. Izuku curled in with her, bringing his legs up until her toes touched his knees, and his head closer to hers, slightly above hers. Eri. His voice startled her, snapping her head up to look into his, eyes of pain coming across eyes of pain. Hers swelled up with tears quickly and flew back in a trail as she darted into Izuku's shirt. The young hero curled his arms around her as she curled her fingers into his shirt. Izuku kept his body hunched in, nearly locking Eri in place so she couldn't leave, and he doubted she wanted to. It's okay, Eri. He spoke to her softly, above her hair for her to hear. It was just a nightmare. None of it was real. You're here. You're safe with me. I promise. Eri said nothing in response. She lied still in Izuku's arm, part of the flinching that came with each sniffle. His thumb brushed along her horn from the tip, following it down into her hair. None of them can hurt you. They'll never hurt you again. I won't let them. Her fears were another worry, and the nightmares they brought fell in that section. She had 2 types of nightmares, those from the past and those which she thought would be the future. It was the 8 precepts of death. Holding her hostage, experiment with her, torturing her, or they would return, kill those who tried to protect her, drag her back by the hair and start all over again. She had been appointed therapy by the school itself to help her with her fears, but Eri wasn't the most compliant with the situations laid out before her. She had fought, she had complained, she had vowed against talking with them. She had made it most difficult to treat her fears, at least professionally. Since she did not comply to speak with others, Izuku tried dipping his foot in and talking with her. In actuality, Eri never spoke with him about them, her nightmares. She didn't want to say them out loud. Words only scared her more, at least her own. But Izuku could ask about them, simplify his question to a yes or no response, and let Eri answer with the nod or shake of her head. It is how he knew, at all, what plagued her mind, though it's not like there was much else which horrified her from experience. He could find out who it was frightening her going off the list of names he had remembered, what they were doing from what he could assume, and if it was something from the past or something she thought would happen. He couldn't get every detail right, but he could get what he needed to talk to her, to reassure her, to help fight her fears and let her know she was safe and in good hands and nothing in the world was going to hurt her ever again. Safe to say it wasn't an everlasting effect, but it didn't stop him from trying again and again. Izuku worked a finger into her hair, curling one of her white locks around it. It was a nightmare, right? He asked her quietly. He didn't expect her to say anything as her response, so the nod against his chest came as no surprise. Of the past, Izuku felt the opposite motion against him. Of the future, Eri gave another nod, and Izuku breathed out his nose into her hair. If he had to choose his least favorite of the 2 nightmares, it was those created of her imagination. He didn't want her past driving her expectations of the future. He didn't want her to build on the horrors she escaped from. He wanted her to forget it all, to move past it all, to find happiness, and he knew it wasn't as easy as it sounded, but he wanted it for her nonetheless. Izuku cupped his hands on either side of her face, holding it gently as he could as he moved her off his chest. His thumbs worked slowly around her cheeks, wiping away the trails left behind and tilting her face up so he could see her and she him. His green eyes looked into her reds, and in them he tried to convey every emotion he could that he knew his words wouldn't get out as well. I know I've said it before, Izuku started, but that day will never come. Chisaki will never find you again, never take you away again, never hurt you again. I won't allow that. I won't allow anyone to do that to you. And if anyone so much as tries it behind my back, it will be the last thing they do. He kept his eyes trained on hers, not allowing himself to blink in the moment. Everyone here, everyone around you, is going to protect you. The principal will protect you. The teachers will protect you. The students will protect you. All Might will protect you. I will protect you. Eri would blink and sniffle and raise one of her own hands to wipe away any fresh tears, but she didn't turn away from Izuku as he spoke. Izuku shook slightly as he lowered himself closer to the girl and planted a kiss on the top of her head. You're safe now. You know why. As Eri stared up to him, he smiled down to her, giving her the best smile he could manage in the night. Because I am here. The whole world was waiting for the day he would say that, but the world could wait longer to hear it come its way. There were others that needed it more. The young hero kept his head above his daughter's, watching her snuggle into his arms and slowly but surely calm herself down. Do you want your night light? He could feel the nod of her head brushing against his bicep, so he complied. He stretched out his limbs, opened himself on the bed, saved his arms under and lazily over Eri. He breathed softly once more and willed within in the power that had been passed down for generations. And with a few sparks of life, full cowl was activated. Izuku knew danger. He faced it enough times to know just how bad something could be. But he never let that stop him from doing what was right, from being a hero. It couldn't stop him. That didn't mean he wasn't hesitant the first night Eri begged him to activate his quirk while they were trying to sleep. The darkness didn't scare her, and when she didn't know if Izuku was beside her, she would forget where she was and assume she had returned to the Yakuza. But she remembered from the raid, when Izuku would activate his quirk, and his body would glow with power. Said hero had entertained the girl in getting a nightlight for the room, and he wouldn't mind it one bit, but she didn't want that. She didn't just want a light in her room, to be able to see Izuku asleep by her. She wanted to know he was okay. She wanted to know he was alive and nearby and protecting her like he promised. She wanted to feel him and the power bouncing around inside him so she could know what was real. So Izuku did as he did best and gave in. But he couldn't just lie down like normal, because it was a strength-based quirk, meaning one wrong more and he could hurt Eri and send the world spiraling under. And it only activated when he was awake, seeing as how he had never destroyed anything in his sleep. So he lied down, limbs out loose to the side and body calm and focused on keep his powers activated to the minimum. It never affected the amount of light he let off, but it did get Eri to believe and smile again. Izuku Midoriya didn't have problems sleeping. Sometimes, a hero just has to work late. Tuesday, Izuku had no idea what Principal Nezu was. It was a running joke with the principal that apparently no one, not a single living soul, knew what Nezu was exactly. He could have been a bear or a mouse or a rat or a dog or a koala or a possum or literally anything else in the world, given the fact he was a lab specimen in the past, and that only contributed to the list stacked against the principal having a safe mentality. Yet that did not deter Izuku from meeting with his principal. He was the first from the school to meet with Eri after she was released from the hospital and found herself under the Midoriya household. While his small demeanor and snappy aptitude startled and unsettled the young girl at the start, his tone and dialogue were more heartwarming and thoughtful than the short masked man Eri was comparing him to in her head. He was the one who planned most of Eri's conditions and settings, letting her stay under Izuku's watch on Yuei's campus since it was the safest place she could be until all that she came from faded into obscurity, and they could promise her safe passage into the world around her. He had, along with many other figures, made an attempt to find Eri's past family, but there were no records they could find of the girl and her past. She was a mystery with only a name and a look and a quirk. He sided with the Midoriyas as the push to adopt Eri in the family, finding protective containment ineffective at keeping her healthy and reassured, and that putting her with people she trusted would be better. Nezu had offered to accompany All Might when she was left in their watchful care as Izuku attended classes. They never got her to open up completely, or even enough to talk sentences with the two gentlemen, but she trusted them enough not to run and hide and cry when they focused on her. She got to learn their names, share hers, and respond with a yes or a no with her head when they asked her questions. The two never brought anything to do with Chisaki or any other member of the Yakuza to keep anything in her from triggering when it didn't need to. But with the work the two adults had to do, it soon proved difficult to watch over Eri at the same time. And that's when Mirio stepped up. The third-year student was the only other person she showed to trust, even if it wasn't to the same level as Izuku. He had stopped by to meet with Nezu concerning his leave from Yuei and plans to move him for future education and work, and Eri clung to him like a bear trap. She talked more when he spoke to her, and loosened her body from the stiff shoulders and hunched back before he was there, and overall was more comfortable with the blonde boy. So when Izuku came to pick her up and reunited with Mirio, Nezu suggested the idea to the two that Togata could watch over her during class time, until Mirio found a place to be and pursue a future. Under the pleading eyes of Eri and Izuku, Mirio caved and accepted the deal, and the principal gave him special passes to come back on campus and stay with Eri in Izuku's room. After the boys and young girl talked and decided she wanted to be at the dorms more than in an office, but Izuku doubted any of that mattered as he walked into Nezu's office at afternoon. The principal has called in the day before, privately, wishing to speak with him over a few things. It didn't take a Yaorazu to guess what that meant, but Izuku wasn't sure he was ready to be confronted about it just yet. He had already been avoiding Uraraka and Ida over the matter, as pushy as they two were, and nothing he said got the two to call quits before he did more than just say. He had gone over the thought of getting it over it, but he kept his mouth shut and pushed ahead until that day was ready. He had more pressing matters to deal with, and they were being brought about by someone else. Izuku Midoriya, please take a seat. Izuku did as he was offered, sitting down on the couch across from where his principal was. Nezu looked as he always did, dressed in his suit with a cup of tea in his hands and a smile across his face. Izuku's more nervous composure competed with Nezu's calm one. Nervous hands drumming along the teen's knees standing out from the still paws holding cup and plate from across the table. Why you wanted to tea talk to me, sir? His teeth rattled as he spoke, betraying the boy as he tried to manage around some sureness of the situation he found himself in. He knew he had to stay, but he wanted to run. If his body had a mouth he could use, it would be screaming at him to run. But instead he had a mouth that refused to comply and accept the situation he was in. So he sat in silent wait as the principal took a sip of his drink before talking. Yes, I do. I hear Mirio is going to be homeschooling Eri while you're in your classes. Izuku felt the ice in his bones melt away as the sentence reached his ears. Was the only thing he could manage out as his brain continued to thaw free from its earlier condition. But it didn't seem to bother Nezu, seeing as how he continued to talk. Toshinori told me he talked with you over the weekend, and that you and our old student came to a consensus to teach Eri some school subjects before you could get her into a school, and that Mirio would be doing the most of the teaching as you were in class, with you offering your own help as the day ended. Am I correct? Izuku took a minute in his head to catch up to the principal and his words until he found himself on the same page. Why, yes, sir. He managed out through surprise and unease, perplexed as to where their talk was going. Good, good. The principal leaned forward and placed his cup and plate on the table between him and his student. It is wonderful to hear you two are taking matters into your own hands to take care of the girl. I've been planning to speak with you about her education. and I have been already talking with your mother about sending her to a school. Though it seems Eri still holds her trust and open nature to a select few, and being surrounded by a bunch of new faces would probably worry her more than any of us would like. I'm happy to see you two settled for the next option, where she could gain knowledge and still be in a setting she wouldn't run from. It pleases me to see everything moving in the right direction. Izuku bowed his head a bit too quickly, nearly colliding into his knees. Thank you, sir, he responded in his lighter body. Speaking of which, how is Eri doing with other people? Izuku breathed through his nose as he came to terms with their conversation going in a direction he wasn't expecting. As she's getting better, the student hero started. She's not too shy in public anymore, now that she knows people aren't watching her intently. She's opening up more to Mom and All Might, which is nice to see, as she's even let Kaken come close enough to touch her without trying to avoid him and run away, and that's wonderful. Izuku tapped his fingers just above his knees, and Mirio is getting her to know what we plan on teaching her, with some small practices to see what she already knows so we know where to start. I take it you two have already decided on the subject matters to teach her. Izuku nodded and looked up to his principal. Yeah, we were planning on starting with math, history, and some language studies for now, maybe the next few weeks or months, and then bringing in the rest later. And that means quirk studies will come at a later date. Izuku nodded again, though he was unsure of it that time. Eri's still not comfortable with her quirk and doesn't have the best control over it just yet, so we were planning on waiting until she feels more comfortable with using it. Or the idea? Eri was, with her quirk, in a common predicament for most children with their own. The control she had over her rewind was still loose, meaning her emotions could easily take over and activate and magnify her powers without her fully realizing it. If Eri was to ever be capable of controlling her quirk, she would have to balance her emotions more consciously, and that was probably most difficult for her to overcome over all the other children. That sounds reasonable enough, Nezu agreed. There are many children who are scared of their quirks in the earlier stages of life, when they're exposed only to the dangerous side of it for years and never catch a glimpse at the other uses they could make of them. To start teaching her about her quirk with the past still fresh in her memory and judgment, I would believe it to be best to wait until the time is right before getting her to practice with it. I'm proud to know you've come to the same conclusion. Nezu hopped off his couch and made way to his desk. Is Eri still having her nightmares? Though the last statement brought a blush to Izuku's cheeks, the question got a defeated nod as its answer. She had one last night, Izuku admitted. I don't know of who, I didn't ask. But I know it was something she's afraid will happen. Oh, those are dangerous nightmares indeed. How Nezu had climbed on top of his desk before Izuku could notice was beyond him. But he put that question behind him for the conversation at hand. The Yakuza we have arrested have been difficult to work with in getting all the information we need. And Chisaki has been attacked by the League and can no longer comply with anyone. And since then the League has kept their heads down, hiding from all watchful eyes. Maybe it is their inactivity and our uncertainty that unsettles young Eri and draws for her the fears she plays out in her head. Maybe our confidence is not strong enough to convince her against her troubles and reassure her everything will be fine. Izuku could feel his nails dig into the skin of his fists. To think that fault fell on him to fuel the nightmares that plagued Eri was torture. He would like anything in the world to do the complete opposite. Can I trust you to lead the charge to change that? In a complete twist from earlier in their conversation, Izuku felt the fire in his stomach and chest cool as he looked to his principal in question. Nezu had toned down his smile into something softer, gazing at the boy in his office. Eri may hold trust towards many people, and there are many more who have vowed to protect her and watch over her and keep her safe, but there is no one closer to her than you are. If there was anyone who could convince her of her safety and assure her that the world would be okay, that it would not come to harm her, it's you. I know that by now you have already started to do such a thing, but I want to make sure you don't stop yet. I believe you are the only one capable of getting her to believe, to trust, to fight back her fears and move forward without them. You and your class have shown to help those around you do just that. And I have no doubt in my mind you can apply that work here too. So I ask you again, can I trust you to lead the charge to change that? Izuku sat in a mix of silence and disbelief at his principal's words, but the two stirred together and poured warmth into his heart, so when he did smile, he was forced to turn it up another 300%. Yes, sensei, he all but exclaimed. I promise to give it my all, and give Eri a home she can learn to grow up safe in. Wonderful, Nezu cheered at his student's passion, and the two fell into a comfortable silence following their declarations. That was, until Nezu continued. One last thing before you go, Midoriya. Sir. Izuku let his smile slip down inch by inch into a question as Nezu patted down the pile of files beside him. Being the principal of this school, most if not all information that circulates through this school comes to me. The Hero Association sending representatives come to the school to meet one-on-one with our first years is no exception. Izuku could hear his heart drop down a rib. It is my job as principal to keep a watchful eye over my students, to assure their safety and happiness in education. I can't do that without knowing a few things. And I cannot say I am always happy to learn more. Nezu looked down at the pile of documents and folders. What's more, it seems one of this year has quite the rep. And there are several more I must speak with. Today, however, I need to speak with you. Nezu gave Midoriya a second of time to think before he carried on. I, for one, agree with them that you are not suicidal. Not once since the day you took the entrance exam have I seen you at all push yourself into the life of fire without the intent of saving others, and then fighting to keep your own life in the process. However, that does seem to play into their assumption that you may lack a will to live, that you are reckless, and that your own life plays second fiddle on the battlefield, which is also very concerning. I've seen you determined to push through everything placed in front of you, much more willing and ready than many of your classmates. You've faced more troubles during your first year here than any one of your peers have, most of the time because they come your way. But you do go looking for trouble yourself. You're a smart student, Midoriya, but you do seem to push aside many thoughts before you get going, and some thoughts that could benefit you in battle and through trouble don't seem to play through your mind. Nezu hopped off his desk and stood in front of it, the Yuei logo plastered behind him. We're not proud of it, but the school has had cases of suicide in the past. Students have tried to use the entrance exam as a means of harming themselves, but the participants around them and the staff were able to intervene before they could be lost. I can see why they thought the same of you, Midoriya. And I am happy to see that you defied their expectations and pulled through to pass in the end, as your intention was. You've proven yourself different from those we've almost lost in the past. But that does not mean we feel anything less on the matter. I believe there is something else going on in your head concerning all this, but I don't wish to make any wrong assumptions that could be more harmful than helpful to act upon. Instead, I would like to share something with you. Izuku's knuckles had turned white from his emotions and anger, subdued within his heart and locked behind his lips. He knew of the past incidents. Yuei could make news off of anything. Every step they took was a story. Every accomplishment and mistake a headline. It hadn't occurred to him until Nezu said it that. Yeah, he did seem likely as another example when he took the test, a quirkless body throwing himself into the fray against robots with the intent to harm and fight the applicants. But Izuku didn't know if the will to live was something he was missing. He did want to, right? Izuku had no response to give, but it didn't seem like the principal was looking for one as he took a seat again. This time by the student's side. You don't have to speak if you do not want to, Midoriya. I won't ask you to, but I do want you to listen. Nezu looked out past the window, to the campus beyond and the towns further. You're a strong kid, Midoriya. Many people have come to recognize your talents and skills, and they have come to benefit and help and save many lives thanks to you. Your classmates care for you deeply, and I know you care for them too. Many of the teachers here know you well and have been surprised by what you have been able to accomplish. All Might has been proud of you and cares about how you feel, and though he won't admit it, I know Aizawa feels the same. Nezu pressed his hands together and placed them between his legs. Your mother has been proud of your enrollment and your accomplishments, and we know she cares that you do good and feel good too. And now your family has a new member, one who trusts you more than the world itself, one who doesn't want to leave your side. You announced pretty loudly at the sports festival your dream, to make people smile, the way other heroes do, correct? Heroes do that, but not many aim to do their job for something as precious as that. It's admirable, and it is something all heroes should do. But being a hero is dangerous, and many find their lives in danger, along with many others around them, during dire situations. Nezu turned his upper body to look at Midoriya, and the green-haired hero turned his head to return the look with his watery eyes. I believe you want to live, Midoriya. I believe you want to stay. If you ever think, during the times when you're most down, that death is near, that you're worried for your own life or find yourself in a situation where someone aims to take life from you, think of those you care about and that care about you. And if you need a reason to fight, make your reason be to see them again. Fight to find your way home. Fight to see your friends again. Fight to see your family again. And fight knowing we care. Izuku had broken down earlier that week. On Monday in a corner of the school no one else was, after he had argued with Uraraka and Ada about spilling what was on his mind. And a day later, he was breaking down again, holding his head in his hands and running through his mind those words. He didn't know why, but it hit, and through his sobs Izuku felt both happy that it did and the paw patting him on the back. Nezu stayed with Midoriya until he was done, until he had let out his tears of fear beyond what he realized and thanked the principal for the time they spent. He let Midoriya go after that, wishing him a good day to follow, and Izuku responded with the same. Midoriya went straight to the dorms after that, rushing past teachers and other students, and he thought he saw a classmate or two as he ran into his class dorm building and up the stairs to his room. And in there found Eri and Mirio playing together, waiting for him to arrive. Eri jumped to greet him with a hug, and Midoriya dropped to his knees to accept it, working his breathing to calm from the sobs and the exercise he was returning from and hugging Eri tight, whispering into her ear how happy he was to have her. Mirio joined in the hug soon after, cornering Midoriya as to what was wrong, but Izuku didn't explain it. Instead, he promised Mirio to talk about it again, and set the date on Saturday to let it out then, when he was ready. When he needed to hear something when they got what they wanted to hear. Izuku had no idea what Principal Nezu was, but if he had to guess, he would say he was kind, caring, thoughtful, keen, and the best person animal whatever he wanted to be at his job. Thursday, Uraraka and Ida worried deeply over Izuku. Their worries were justified. His quirk had been tearing the boy apart from day one, ripping off skin and muscle, spilling blood and bone, leaving scars and pain, and it took far too long until the two stopped seeing their friend in such a broken and miserable state. They assumed he had a second quirk for attracting trouble, something that only made life worse to witness. Both had seen his state after the fight with Bakugo at the start of the year. They had seen him only briefly lying in the dirt at the USJ. They watched him break his body 5 times over in his battle with Todoroki. They watched doctors and nurses carry him away when the League of Villains had captured Katsuki, and individually they saw more pain. Ada was by his side when Izuku tore scars into his hands, as he struggled with himself on the inside as Katsuki was right around the corner, surrounded by the League and all for one. As he tried to push away his tears from his failure to save a child from the clutches of a madman when she had been right there in Izuku's arms. As he collapsed outside the doors of their dorm from shock and walked past Ada without a second thought, Uraraka saw him break his legs and arms in an effort to save her life during the entrance exam. And Tamura Shigaraki held him by the throat already and set to turn him to dust. As he pushed his limbs back into place when they fought at the lodge, as he withered in pain as Eri's quirk went haywire, Midoriya had given them more than enough reasons to fret over everything he did. And as he cried up the steps to his room just that Sunday, they wanted what was best for him, because he deserved better than the best. It was in their best intentions to be there for their friend, to be by his side and listen to him when he needed to talk about his troubles. It wasn't their intent to get him to snap, to yell at them to back off and stop asking him about why he looked so down on Sunday and when he returned on Monday, and then make him storm off in an attitude not even Katsuki had shown to be capable of demonstrating. Izuku returned to the classes of the rest of the day and Tuesday as silent as he could be, answering with short responses to any question given his way, responded without looking or emotion when he was called on in class, and turning a cold shoulder to interactions from those around him. Uraraka and Ida knew it unsettled everyone in the class, even Bakugo, with how different Midoriya was acting, and they didn't know if they could push their luck to apologize if he wouldn't just brush them aside again. They knew he lived a rough life, if the tidbits of information he let slip out about his struggles and his quirkless days were any indication, and they knew there was more that he had yet to share, with them and maybe anyone at all. The only other person who could possibly know was Bakugo, but he was no help in learning of what there was to know and what to do about Izuku's attitude. All they wanted to be was a friend to Izuku, and they couldn't help but feel they were failing at something so simple. So it came as a surprise to them, and most likely the rest of the class, as Izuku showed up on Wednesday without an air of hostility around him, smiling again and conducting a conversation with Todoroki and Asui and Mainta and even Jiro when they came to him before their classes could begin. It came as a surprise to watch him jump to answer in class, to involve himself and participate again with his wide eyes and his mutters and his faster than one's hand should be when writing hand. And it came as a surprise to them when he pulled Uraraka and Ida aside during lunch to apologize to them for the way he responded on Monday and treated them on Tuesday. And the two in turn apologized for their actions, for being inconsiderate and trying to push their friend into something he was clearly not ready for or comfortable with. And the three made up and promised to put that day behind them and go on being what they were before, what the three liked being. And then it was the day after. It was lunch. The mess hall was filled with students and their food, and the trio of one secluded themselves from the crowd to sit in a circle in their own company. They chatted softly, or really Uraraka did, and Ida and Midoriya just responded shortly and kindly as she went on about a lot of gossip and hero news, and it was nice, until Uraraka and Ida noticed how distant Midoriya's eyes were. How he was staring far away at the table inches in front of him, not even touching his food. It grew worry between them, and they made move to talk to him, but he beat them to it. Uraraka, Ada, the two in question stopped their voices from calling out Izuku's name, but he didn't seem to notice, even as he looked up to the two. Sorry, I wanted to bring this up yesterday, but I kinda forgot to, in the moment. My bad. Izuku scratched his chin and looked down between the two. Is it alright if we talk about, it on Saturday? If you still want to. Uraraka and Ida widened their eyes as his question. While they didn't know what it was, it seemed unlikely to reason out the idea of it being that which came to him on Sunday and that followed him into the school week. They had told Izuku he could hold it from them until the day he was ready, so they were surprised it somehow slipped his mind yesterday following that and that he came to a decision on telling them about it. Are you sure you want to, Deku? Uraraka questioned, twiddling her fingers on her food. We don't want you to have to share it if you feel forced to. I want to. Izuku interrupted with a raise of his hand, though it in his eyes could show the two just how nervous he was. You two deserve to know. I'm sorry that I've been acting so weird because of it, and I'm sorry I've been holding it back from you both all this time, but I feel ready to share it with you. He managed a wavy smile to the two and they responded with small smiles of their own. Besides, I kinda promised Mirio I would tell him about it on SAD too, so might as well let you all know it once, you know. The two nodded in sync. If you're sure about it, Midoriya. We'll listen, Ida told the shorter boy, and said will be fine with me. Me too, Uraraka jumped in. Where and when should we meet up? Would my room be okay, and sometime around noon? Izuku suggested. Sure, but would Eri be okay with that? Ida brought up. Izuku chuckled out his nerves and scratched his neck. I kinda already talked her into spending Saturday with Mom at the mall. I thought it would be a good thing for Eri to spend more time with her, and though it took some convincing her, she agreed to do it. The two agreed it was a smart idea. Their care for Izuku extended to his family. Their worry shared with his mother, and together they linked Izuku and Eri into the worry and must care for box. She wasn't too open with either of them, and Uraraka had seen the state she was in before she was rushed to the hospital, but neither tried to push their luck with the girl and force them into being her friends. For a moment, they began to worry if what Izuku wanted to share was about Eri. But if that was the case, they reasoned he would have been acting much worse than he had been the past few days. It was at least somewhat reassuring, though it was clear that there was a problem all the same, bothering Izuku when it shouldn't be. But they would be there for him. Sad it is then, Ida decided. And Uraraka nodded her head in agreement. Izuku balanced his smile to the two across from him and darted his eyes up for a moment before breathing in with shock. His eyes dropped quickly from the clock and he forced food into his mouth until he started choking. Uraraka and Ida jumped to the aid of their friend, the former worrying and freaking out over him and the latter scolding him for his absurd idea to try and eat everything at once while they tried to get it out so he could breathe again. Uraraka and Ida worried deeply over Izuku. He had no idea just how much they did, but he was grateful they did all the same. Saturday, Izuku didn't have friends. There was never a friend who moved far away. No friend who went missing after a few years. No friends who got bullied because of him and then turned on them or disappeared or anything like that so they couldn't appear later in the story. He never had a friend after Katsuki got his quirk. He was just alone growing up, aside from having his mother, but even then, maybe that's why he tried so hard to get Eri to be open to being open with the rest of his class. He didn't want her to go through the same struggles he did. And maybe that's why he so quickly accepted it when Eri called him daddy. Whatever his reasons for doing for her what he did, he just knew that he did things for her, and making sure she was comfortable and okay when she left with Inko for the mall was something he had to do. He made sure Eri knew that at any point, if she started to become worried and wanted or even demanded for Izuku, she could ask Inko to bring her right back here. He himself was far from feeling comfortable on the inside, but he kept his smile up for her until she left, and kept smiling until it hurt to. And since she left, Izuku had been waiting at his desk, working on the homework he had for the weekend. Between each question his eyes darted to the drawer by his knees. And it wasn't until he was already 5 pages of work in that he caved and opened the drawer and took out the papers he got from Mr. Chain. While the Hero Association's concerns in document form were among the pile, that wasn't all he was given. They, too, had been thinking about Eri's education, and were a day behind in offering idea, though theirs were less open to the idea of homeschooling. Probably the most intriguing document had to do with his quirk. Not everyone in the world knew of one for all yet. Some knew it in the past, some had found it out for themselves. Eri still didn't know the truth about his quirk, so when he talked about his quirk, he never named it, just told them it was a quirk for strength enhancement. Everyone else had a name to their quirk, even Eri did, and it showed on the documents about her that he received. But Izuku didn't know why his quirk was given another name by the government. Either someone was trying to keep the truth hidden or even they didn't know the truth about it. So what they offered on Izuku's records were weird, to say the least. Name, Midoriya, Izuku. Quirk, raw power. Description, the user draws energy from an unknown source of power and applies it in physical enhancement. It can be used for greater strength, faster speed, and mobility in the air. They were half right with their description. Izuku gave them credit for that, though he had yet to get to grips with the latter two and even perfect the first. But it brought questions to Izuku's mind if the description was lacking, incomplete, like there could be more he could do to fill it up. Maybe it was just the urge to change the name to the truth, but he couldn't do that, both in terms of capability and that fact he promised to keep it a secret. So what was it, that urge in his chest, and that nagging feeling in the back of his head? Pushing that uncertainty aside, Izuku acknowledged the only piece of paper he had no expectations of, and that was of the phone number. Chain had given it to him at the end of their talk, And the surprise didn't kick in until he had confiscated in his mom the more worrying news. And now that it had his attention, Izuku wasn't sure what to do with it. Yeah, it would be rude to just ignore it, like he was never given it. But that would be rude to do to a fan. Did All Might ever call his fans? A knocking on his door had Izuku jumping and darting his arms around to catch the papers and shove them back into the drawer before anyone else could see them. It's unlocked, he called out, kicking the drawer closed and turning back to his homework to look as though he had never left it. The door opened slightly, and not even all the way before a head over a head peeked in to look and get a snicker out of the green-haired hero. Izuku chuckled into his mouth as Uraraka, Ida, and Mirio mimicked what Eri and Mirio has done a while back as a small joke to get the little girl to laugh and get a laugh out of the classmates in the hallway, just so it stopped their conversation from getting any louder and scaring Eri as it was beginning to. That meant Izuku knew who was responsible for this. Hey guys, he struggled out in a laugh. See, I told you he would appreciate it. Mirio spoke to the two beneath him, pushing them into the room and following right behind. Uraraka nodded her head and smiled in agreement, whereas Ida slouched down with his shoulders in less joy. I still don't understand how it was supposed to help us in becoming a hero, Ida admitted, looking down at the floor instead of up to the three around him. Ida leaned his back against the wall beside Izuku's desk. Uraraka hopped onto his bed to sit, and Mirio positioned himself by the door after closing it, leaving Izuku still at his desk chair. Heroes are supposed to make people smile, right? Mirio turned a thumb in Midoriya's direction, who was indeed smiling, and by doing what we just did, you were able to accomplish that. Ida's head lifted slowly as he stayed silent until slapping his fist into his open palm, startling his two classmates beside him. Of course, how could I have forgotten that so quickly? His fist raised and opened to his chin, and the elbow slipped onto the palm below and he fell into a thinking phase Midoriya was famous for. Uraraka had fallen on her back, stifling her giggles behind her hands at Ida's nature, and Izuku kept his smile over his hand and a hand over his chest watching the class president jump into his professional attitude. He looked beyond the engine heir to the retired hero, sharing with him another smile until the older boy looked around the room in slight confusion and disappointment. Eri already left. Izuku nodded and dropped his hands into his lap. Yeah, she left about an hour ago to the mall, Izuku explained. I think Kaken's mom went with them, so at least I know she'll be safe. Bakugo's mom. Ida looked to his classmate. I don't think we've met her. Is she where Katsuki gets his quirk from? Izuku chuckled and intertwined his fingers nervously. Not really. His quirk is a mixture of his parents, but he gets his fierce nature from his mom. If anyone tries anything, she'll stop them before they get anywhere. If by fierce nature you mean his yelling and insults, then I think I understand. Uraraka picked herself back up to sit. If so, then shouldn't we be worried that Eri might get scared from her acting like Bakugo? I would, if she didn't do it differently than he did. Kaken just yells at anyone, a lot, but his mom is more straight to the point and confident to let her yelling just be open to everyone. I have faith that she'll make Eri feel safe if that has to happen. Izuku gulped and coughed into his shoulder. Also, I may or may not have bribed Eri with the promise of brownies if she went with mom to the mall, no matter when she returns, and I am not that good at baking. Mirio chuckled and pointed a thumb at himself. Don't worry, buddy, I can help you with that. Been practicing some cooking back home, so I got your back. Uraraka nodded with vigor and clapped her hands together. I'll help you too, she announced. I'd love to help make something for Eri. Ida, though silent, nodded as she spoke, showing his offer to do the same as the others. Izuku smiled to each and every one of them, giving them thanks for their offers, and the four stayed in a comfortable silence of smiles. Mirio drummed his fingers along his arm, looking down for a moment before looking back to Midoriya. So what is it you wanted to talk about? He asked, and though the matter he was touching on was delicate, he meant his words with a sincerity and innocence Izuku could tell from the tone. That at least took a weight off his shoulders about breaking the news. It's about the Hero Association and their Heroes' Personal Affairs Department, right? Ida was the one that brought it up, and Izuku nodded, squeezing his hands together and looking down at his feet. Now was the time he promised to talk about it and he had to get it out. He swallowed down his nerves in some fresh air, arguing in his head how to share it before his voice could. Uraraka held her hands together and leaned towards Izuku. Is it about Eri? She questioned softly, and she was relieved to see how fast he shook his head in response. Mirio and Ida let their own sighs of reliefs out, knowing the worst they could think of wasn't real. Izuku didn't pay them any attention as his mind settled on telling them like he was ripping off a band-aid and convinced his heart to do it. Mirio smiled again as the fear he had begun to build in his chest evaporated immediately. That's good. For a moment you almost. The Hero Association thinks I want to die. Had me ... were ... ride ... Mirio's smile dropped with each syllable, slowly catching up with the looks of horror and disbelief Uraraka and Ida wore as their responses. Izuku hadn't moved as he spoke, his head still ducked down in disappointment, probably even dropping further than it was moments ago. They thought I was suicidal, he continued, since no one would speak up. They don't think I want to live. His voice sounded weak and wet, and the three around him to see his head jerk up as he swallowed. They think I'm trying to get myself killed. Izuku dug his fingers into his skin. And if I keep doing what I'm doing, they'll expel me from school and put me under house arrest and therapy. Why would they think that? Uraraka managed to get out through her worry and horror, leaning closer to the one in the chair. Because I keep throwing myself into danger. I keep getting hurt. I keep hurting myself. I keep worrying everyone, and I don't stop, and they think it's intentional. Izuku curled in on himself more, holding in the emotions that continued to bubble up inside. But that's not your fault, Ida exclaimed, taking a step forward in his announcement. How could it be your fault that the villains attack you? Why should you be blamed for being put in danger? Because they don't attack me. Ida leaned back up in bewilderment from Izuku's statement and tone of fire behind them. I threw myself into danger fighting Kaken, knowing he wouldn't hold back against me. I jumped at the villains when they came to kill All Might. I broke my arms and legs, urging Todoroki to throw everything he had at me. I went looking for Stain and you. I stayed to fight Muscle and tear my body apart. I agreed to go to the League of Villains, and I didn't hesitate to face Chisaki and fight him with my own two hands when his could rip me apart in a second. And each time I just brought myself closer and closer to death. Izuku hissed out the last word, either because he hated it or he was afraid of it. The three in his room watched Izuku as he broke down in a way they weren't familiar with seeing him in. Deku, Uraraka choked out. It's not true. What they're saying ... is it? I don't know. Uraraka jumped back in shock with the two beside her as Izuku screamed his response. His head and swung up in his arms with it, and the three of them could see the trails of water down the sides of his face. I don't know, in that. I can't handle that. I can't just stop being a hero. I can't just try less, but I can't lose all this either. I can't just give up and lose my license and lose my hero name and costume or any of you. I don't want to leave you, or the rest of the class, or Aizawa, or All Might ... or my mom ... or Eri. Izuku's voice gazed, and when he did, and collapsed his face into his hands. His fingers curled on his forehead as his palms pressed against the tears pouring from his eyes. I'm scared, and I don't know what ... what to do, and I don't know if there is anything to do, and I'm afraid I can't do anything, and I'm just gonna lose it all, and I can't. In his sobs, Izuku could feel a body press down on him, followed by another. He could feel the arms wrap around him and the hands hold onto him, but he didn't look up and just accepted what he was given. It's okay, Izuku. It was Uraraka's voice by his ear, and he could hear and feel the tears she was shedding with him. Don't cry. We're here for you. We'll always be here for you. Please don't cry. He could feel arms tighten around him, ones he assumed to be hers. We'll help you, okay? We'll get through this. You'll get through this. You have us. Her head buried into his shoulder, and he couldn't tell if it was hers against his head in the pile of bodies, but he hoped it was. You don't have to go through this alone. We've got your back. Promise. And he cried. He sat in the group hug and he cried and he sobbed out thanks after thanks to the three holding him up and supporting him and being there for him. He couldn't hear the person outside, listening in without a word of their own to add. But Izuku would have gladly accepted them in his room and in the hug. Izuku didn't have friends. He was too clingy to treat those who got close to him as anything less than family. Sunday. A full week. Izuku survived a full week extra to the first since the news of his possible demise, and the director of his misery, Mirio, really was the bluntest with Izuku regarding the situation and his overdramatic definition of it all, more so than All Might or Aizawa were, even with the latter holding back on sugarcoating his own thoughts on everyone else's. Being thought of as suicidal wasn't the be-all and all of his hero career, because he knew the truth was that he wasn't. But it did go to hammer in what faults the teen had that other people saw in him. Rash, abrasive, broke willingly, and saw the world through the narrow and ignorant lens of save to mirror Katsuki's view of win. There was more to a hero than the one word, much more that the two boys still had to meet to be not just heroic, but a hero. Izuku pondered if Stain would agree with that sentiment, but Izuku didn't argue with the concerns voiced by his friends or his teachers or his mentor or his mothers. He appreciated them for saying what they did. The talks they had the weekend before as the mothers returned from the mall with the young Eri in tow, and when they were waiting for them to arrive with the little girl, were ones Izuku believed he needed to hear after he did. And from then on Izuku's week went. Uraraka and Ida may have been excessive with their attention of the green-haired hero, but he didn't fight the attention. He welcomed the praise and good intent they gave him with a blush and a smile, and in return gave them the praise and appreciation they deserved for the heroes and people they were becoming. It was a sense of joy in his heart he wasn't too familiar with seeing and having, but it was one he let stay and grow. Togata was almost the same case since the last weekend of admittance, with the older boy filling a role more as a mentor than a fellow student, though he knew how to play that too. The blonde shared what hours he could by Izuku and Eri's side during the weekdays before he was called home. And while some talk drifted into the topic that hung over their heads, the boys managed to keep most conversation on Eri and her studies. The young girl was getting a good start and introduction to the studies planned for her, and she did show interest and joy thanks to the attitude Mirio acted with as her teacher. The calming sense Izuku's friends gave him felt sorely needed. And then on came another weekend, one where Izuku found himself sitting across from Eri, with nothing but the open space of his floor and cards set about orderly in a game the teen remembered playing with dominoes when he was younger. Izuku didn't know how much longer he would be staying at the on-campus dorms during his time at Yuei. He enjoyed the time he had with his classmates, and the interactions and days spent with them were very helpful to his attitude and was an experience he wished he had when he was a kid with Katsuki around. But he wanted Eri to have more space to move, especially if she was hesitant to be around most of her other classmates. Soon, Izuku would put up for debate when he should move back home, if he should, and Eri was okay with it. But that day could wait a while longer. Izuku placed down another card, lining up its symbol with that of another and looking across the room to the white-haired child. "It's your turn, Eri," he told her, and the little girl looked up and nodded before darting her head back into her cards. Izuku smiled at the sight of Eri, sitting with her knees up to her chest, hands resting right above them, with her cards spread across like a poker player's, and only leaving her hairline and stub of a horn visible for Izuku to look at. Eri sneaked a peek back over her cards to Izuku, and blushed away behind them again as she saw him watching. It reminded Izuku of himself, and he laughed awkwardly in his chest at the thought. She was as shy as he had been, if not rightfully more so, just as interested and hyperactive as he was in their interests, and as big of a fan of him as he was of All Might. The teen hero turned on his neck, looking at his desk, and at the drawer closest to the floor. Now that he remembered, Izuku did have a fan. One that wasn't Eri. One that the Hero Association gave him the contact information of, so when he found the time, he could give them a call. One that he didn't know if he could believe at first, be it a prank or a trick to get him to talk. But since it came directly from the organization overlooking hero activity, he didn't believe it to be likely as either of those options. He could only hope he was right. Reaching over, Izuku took hold of the drawer handle and pulled it open to reveal the stack of papers topped with the blue slip. He took it away and held it in one hand as his cards folded into the other, and stared at the number and words associated with it in silence. Izuku had half a mind to call them in the past week, but the time to do so eluded him, populated instead by friends and family and school and training and sleep. And atop those were the worries he had, aside from the falsehood of the number itself. Firstly, this fan of his was a girl. Secondly, as far as Izuku could decipher from Mike Sensei's classes, this fan was that of English decent in name, with it written down on the paper in English, and as Mr. Chain told him, living in America, the country his birth father worked in. Izuku wasn't really confident they could communicate all that well without a translator in the middle. And thirdly, Izuku didn't know how to interact with fans. He's never gotten many chances just to talk with and get to know heroes he fanboys over, and the only time he did was when he was told he couldn't be a hero without a quirk. And while people, just random people who have seen him before like at the sports festival, have given him compliments before, no one ever interacted with him like a fan he was familiar with. Without that familiarity, an idea of what to do so he isn't stuttering over each and every word, Izuku wasn't sure he was prepared to act. Izuku's attention was cut away from his thoughts to the real world as a bundle of white dressed in blue snaked into his lap and peered from his lap to the paper in his hands. The upper half of his body jolted in surprise as Eri took seat between his legs, staring with intrigue at the paper in his hands. Izuku blushed and breathed his calm demeanor back to full, easing back into the proximity Eri liked to be in with her father role, safe in his bubble of space. From what Uncle Mirio had started to introduce to her in her studies, and Daddy Izuku had helped her go over to understand it better, she at least knew well enough that the words written on the paper were in English, though she still couldn't read it or pronounce all the letters the way they had to be in the situations and circumstances they're used in. The young girl leaned her head back and looked up to the teen hero. "Daddy, what does it say?" she asked him. Izuku laughed in an awkward tone as Eri's head pressed into his stomach and he tried to reassure on the pronunciation of the name. "Apparently, I have a fan living in America." Eri gasped at the news as though it was the most amazing thing in the world, which it probably was to her, knowing the hero who saved her had more people who knew how awesome of a hero he was, while Izuku looked back at the slip of paper with a squint. "And I believe her name is Amelia Parks." Eri looked to him with a blank stare, mumbling to herself as she tried to match the syllables in the order he said them and the way he spoke them. "Amelia Parks." Izuku laughed in good nature and placed his cards on the ground to give Eri a pat on the head not dug into his shirt. "I'm not too sure myself, but that's close enough to her name. But, apparently, she's a fan of mine, and I've never met her." Eri leaned her head back up, letting Izuku rest his hand atop her hair. I think I should call them, just to see why they wanted to talk to me." The green teen looked down to the girl still reading the name off the card. Would you be alright if I did that? Two red eyes leaned back and looked up to the green of her father figures. Right now. Izuku nodded slowly. We can keep playing if you want to. We don't have to stop. I've just been putting this off for a while now. Thought it was about time I give them a call. I think I owe it to them, since they went out of their way to get it sent to me. Eri hummed and leaned back into Izuku's stomach, eliciting a nervous chuckle from the older boy. Okay, she said with a smile, throwing off the small one Izuku had. Really? You're alright with me doing it right now? Uh-huh. The long-haired girl nodded in vigor. Uncle Mirio says all heroes have fans. And that ... Eri folded in Izuku's lap, trying to run the words through her head and remember what Togata told her. And heroes should return the kindness. Izuku stared blankly at his not adopted into the role but took it anyways daughter. And the smile she was giving him before mirroring with a soft grin of his own. Yeah, heroes should do that, shouldn't they? Izuku could at least assume that much about a hero and their fans. He looked down at the slip with the name and number before grabbing his phone and typing away. Guess I should, then. Nerves still bit at Izuku, for making calls was never easily his thing. The furthest call he was ever in was with his birth father in America. And that was years ago with his mother dictating the call. He hoped he didn't mess this up. Still, I'm surprised I have a fan who wants to talk to me so bad they send their number to the Hero Association. But Daddy, Izuku looked back down as his fingers finished typing, locking his eyes back onto hers. You're such a cool hero. All heroes have fans. Izuku chuckled through his blush and set the paper down to wrap an arm around Eri in a hug. Yeah, they do. Thanks, Eri. He lifted the phone to his ear and listened to it ring as he hugged Eri. Did you place a card down already? The little girl nodded her answer. Guess it's my turn then. Izuku took his arm back and picked his pile of cards back up, fanning them out in his hand to look through them and check the assortment of cards lying about the floor. The line by his ear clicked, and something on the other end shuffled before a voice came across. Hello, this is the park's residence. Izuku gulped a bit at the different language and sorted through his head what present Mike had taught his class on the English language, pushing aside the voice being male instead of female. It was probably just someone else in the family if their last name was the same. Hello, sir, he greeted in return. Hello. The man on the other responded slowly as Izuku took a card from his hand and set it down in the pool of cards before him and Eri. May I ask who is calling? Izuku blinked and stumbled over his words. Izuku Midoriya ... sir. And, may I ask, why are you calling at 6 in the afternoon? I'm calling for Amelia Parks. And what, pray tell, do you want to speak to my daughter for? Izuku gulped again as the man's tone changed. He couldn't understand everything being told to him, but he could get enough from it to know the voice belonged to the father of his supposed fan. I'm ... the hero, Deku, sir. Oh, you are. The man's tone shifted, losing from it the edge it held for a few seconds. You're actually the hero, Deku, from Japan. Yes, sir. The Hero Association gave me this number. Mr. Chain. Hagen. Oh, thank heavens he managed to get it to you. He never got back to me if he got it in the mail or not. I was worried it wouldn't get to you. That's how they got the number then. Izuku muttered to himself, letting his arm fall around Eri again as she slipped down into his lap. Guess that explains your accent. Then, the man on the phone continued before clearing his throat. It's a pleasure to meet you, Deku. You. Izuku looked ahead in shock. You know Japanese? Not too much. My apologies. The man chuckled back into English. I've only learned a little from my daughter. She's been studying it for the last year, and I've managed to pick up a few things from her. Speaking of which, that's why you're calling, isn't it? She's been wanting to meet or talk to you eventually. Izuku groaned in his throat as he tried to keep up with the language. Why yeah, is she there? Yes, she's here. She'll be delighted to know you called. I'll get the phone to her right away. Thank you. Izuku looked down to Eri as she rolled over to face her body to his and looked up at the older boy. My turn. She nodded and returned to her position lying against him in comfort and content. Why are you talking like that? She asked him as he sorted through his cards for one to play. You mean speaking English? The small girl nodded. It's what they're speaking. I'm doing it too so I can talk with them and know what they say, and vice versa. What does vice versa mean? I in this. It means so they can understand what I say too, and our talk isn't one-sided. Eri nodded slowly and wrapped her arms into his shirt to get him to smile and chuckle. But you just said he knew Japanese. He only knew some. Not as much as we do. She nodded again and Izuku used his open hand to run a hand down her hair in comfort. The phone by his ear shuffled audio from the other end, two voices further from the mic of the phone. A shuffling came through again, and Izuku sat still as he waited in silence for someone to speak up. But when nothing came after several seconds, he took it to speak up. Hello. Hello, came the quick reply of a female's voice on the other end. Are you really the hero, Deku? Her words came out pretty quickly, almost too quick for Izuku, but he caught on well enough. Yes, I am. He heard what he assumed was a gasp before the girl's voice grew quiet. She must have been talking to herself before her voice popped back to life through the phone. Oh, wow, you actually called. Oh my god, this is amazing. I'm actually on the phone with a hero. Oh my god, I can't believe it. It's finally happening. Izuku felt dizzy trying to keep up with her words. He understood only about half of it, losing other pieces to time and sitting there in slight surprise. You alright? As far as Izuku was certain, she wasn't breathing, just talking, and knowing how his mumble sessions went, forgetting to breathe wasn't out of the question. Oh, sorry. The girl giggles her nerves through the phone. Hello, Deku, sir. My name is Amelia Parks. It's nice to meet you. Oh wow, you do speak Japanese. Amelia laughed softly again. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. This is my first time talking to a hero so directly. The girl cleared her throat away from the phone. It's an honor to talk to you. Sorry if I seem a bit crazy. It's fine, Izuku assured her with a nervous giggle of his own. This is a first for me, as well. I've never gotten something like this before, so, really. The American girl sounded as surprised as her words were. But, I assumed with the sports festival, you would have been on a lot of people's radar. I've seen your name pop up in the news with Stain, the League of Villains, and that Yakuza group since then. There's bound to be more people who have been following you in the news. You saw the sports festival? Of course I did. The school scheduling here is different from Japan's, isn't it? We didn't have anything big going on here at the same time as you guys, so I was able to watch it all. It's so cool how you didn't use your quirk until those last fights, and you totally should have won that too. Destroying all that ice just by punching it was awesome. Thank you. Izuku rubbed the back of his head and watched Eri take control of his and her cards and work on sorting them around the floor. But you know my name from the festival, then? You don't have to call me Deku. Well, yeah. I know it from the broadcast, but not a lot of heroes go by their names for their hero names. And since you are a hero, I should just call you by that name. It's more appropriate, aside from my friend here who's thinking of calling himself Red. It's not an impressive hero name. Oh, your friend wants to become a hero. Yeah, he's in college right now studying in heroics. Sorry, I don't know this in Japanese yet. He gets to try for his license next year, but he's already chosen his name and it's just a color. I don't know why he chose something so bland. I don't know ... one. I knew someone who wanted to go by the name of Pinky as their hero name. For the sake of not calling out of his classmates and their choice of a hero name, Izuku decided against mentioning Mina's name. Really? Yeah. Her first option got shut down, so she decided to take the opposite route of the first and think of something that was more cheery and light, kinda like how she acts in general. It's not too bad a choice, really. Oh, I don't think his is like that, though. Aside from it being his favorite color and his quirk's color, he hasn't really said anything else as to why he chose it. Does he have a slogan to go with it? Some of my classmates made one to go with their names, and one of their names was just a slogan, so really Red wasn't the worst choice in the world. I'm sorry, I can't remember it. He hasn't talked about that in a while. No, it's fine. It's just ... that might help with understanding why he chose it. Izuku wanted to ask about the guy's quirk, but didn't, and he wanted to talk about his own hero name, but he didn't. Both topics felt a bit too like digging deeper than he should, even if there was something from them both he could take to try and defend his choice in a hero name. Instead, he moved the conversation elsewhere. So ... how do you know Japanese, if you don't mind me asking? In all honesty, Izuku felt weird jumping back and forth between the two languages, but neither had stumbled over what the other was on about, so at least it wasn't a mess of a talk. Oh, right, a more muffed chuckle came from her end, and it sounded embarrassed the way Izuku knew he could laugh. I'm going to study abroad in Japan. Actually, I finished high school a few months ago, and I was learning it in my last year, but I'm still trying to work up enough money for the trip, so I'm still home working it all. Wait, you're going to come here? Izuku straightened up in his spot, and then nearly tumbled back and Eri fell back into his lap from the card map on the floor. Yeah, but I probably won't go for a while longer. Your next school year starts a few months after the new year, right? I'm hoping by then I can come to study. Sorry if I don't pronounce everything correctly, or if I've made a few mistakes already. It's alright. I'm the same with English right now. Izuku laughed in a nervous tone at the admittance, but he still smiled and used his free hand to play with Eri's as they took hold of it. I'm sorry, I don't know what else to talk about. I just thought I should call since you went out of your way and all to give me your number, your dad's number, home phone number. I don't know which it is, really, but I didn't want to be rude and just not call, but I didn't know what to talk about. Thank you. The girl on the phone cut through his ranting. For calling. She laughed a nervous laugh. I don't really know what to talk about either. I just wanted to say hello, I guess. I just think you're a cool hero, so I wanted to call ... so thank you for this. You're You're welcome. The successor blushed in his smile and looked down to Eri, who looked up to him with a smile just because he had one. And, thanks. This is the first time someone's done something like this. I hope your trip here goes well. Thank you. And, if you're okay with it, when I come to Japan, would it be alright to meet you? In person? You want to? The green-haired teen cut himself off with a coughing fit that worried the girl in his lap. He turned away to catch his throat and calm down himself and the girl worrying over him, still being quiet though he knew not why. Sorry about that, when you come to Japan, I wouldn't mind meeting you. I'd be honored to. You would? Are you kidding? It would be an honor to meet you. Thank you. I shouldn't be leaving for a while longer, so maybe we call again to schedule a day to meet. Before I fly over, maybe. Oh, okay. Izuku raised his hand above Eri and ran it through her hair. Do you plan to come before the new school year then? Yeah, I should. Maybe I'll catch you before your graduation. Who knows? Amelia giggled on her end, and Izuku met it with a smile she couldn't see. Thank you, again, for this. It's so cool that I got to talk to you. A blush was added atop his smile that he was lucky she couldn't see. Guess I'll hear from you again, maybe? Why yeah, guess we'll talk again. Thank you as well. Good luck with everything. Thanks. And you too, bye. Goodbye. Izuku kept his phone by his ear as the line went dead and he stared forward across his room. It was a new experience for Deku, being called out as a hero by someone who thinks of him the way he would think of most other heroes before him. He was half tempted to pinch his arm to check if he was dreaming or not, but the little girl shaking his shirt down from his lap was enough to set his mind straight. The hero chuckled nervously and wrapped his arm around Eri to lock her in a hug. Sorry that took so long, Eri, and that I kinda lost sight of the game. I didn't mean for that to happen. It's okay, she responded, cuddled up against the stomach of his shirt. You're smiling. She was right, he was smiling, and not one that was meant to cover anything up. Just a real one. Yeah, I guess. I'm happy I have a fan. Izuku took his other arm around Eri and hoisted her a bit higher into the hug. And I have you. No reason I shouldn't be smiling. Eri dived her head into the shoulder by his left, hiding away the blush he was sure was growing on him too. He could hear her groan against his shirt to not be too affectionate, similar to a way he remembered acting with his mom when she showered him with moments of affection. Izuku thought it was cute, but opted to keep that comment in his heart instead of making her curl away from it more. So you finished all the cards? He could feel her head nod against him. Good job. Looks a bit like a flower, doesn't it? She took it slowly, but Eri did turn around in his hold to look at the assortment of playing cards lying about and connected in a flower-esque design. She nodded her agreement with him, and he smiled at the side of her head. Wanna do that? Make some shapes with the cards while we wait for lunch. She turned back to look up at him in his smile, and he widened his and helped her forward to take apart the pile and rearrange them together. Wednesday. Izuku wasn't too sure of what to expect out of the last few weeks of the term before the winter break rolled around. But a rehash of the Quirk apprehension test from the start of the year seemed reasonable enough to the teen hero. He changed as quickly as he could into his gym uniform and followed the rest of his class out to the open space they tested last time. Even with the winter season upon them, the land was still dry enough of snow to allow them to practice. But Izuku didn't really care about the snow. And surprisingly enough to himself, he wasn't all too interested as to where he would place after his tests. What he did care about was his quirk. What One for All could do now that he had control over it enough to not break himself with each and every use. What he cared about was figuring out what his quirk was. It was a question that bothered Izuku since the Hero Association had named his regular strength enhancement quirk as raw power. Izuku already knew quite a few people were in on the secret of his quirk, the quirk All Might had wielded before him, so it came to a surprise to both users when the association gave it another name. Toshinori had decided that they go along with the cover-up of the quirk, whether it was a move intentional or not on as part. But that wasn't what caught Izuku's eye. It was that description they made of his quirk to go with the new name, as every quirk looked to have. And while it wasn't far from what Izuku knew of the quirk, it was off enough to get Izuku thinking about what he didn't know of the quirk. What hadn't been shared with him by his mentor. What about One for All am I missing? With the time on his hands when he could find it, Izuku put his quirk under analysis and a microscope, doing what he could to run through it to the end he needed to find. So as classmates were called up before him, Izuku stood there in wait and activated his quirk, sending power through his veins and emitting the faint glow his body always did when in full cowl. Izuku joined the select few of his classmates and glanced over to look at him, and like them watched his body stay still as he flexed his hands. Izuku needed to dive deeper into solving full control over his quirk. With the Yakuza and the League and many individual villains on the loose, time seemed to pressure him on solving it all quickly, and Izuku was willing to meet that challenge head-on. Izuku was so caught up in his thoughts that he almost missed Aizawa calling him up to race, only acknowledging his teacher when the boy called up to run with him as well, patted him on the shoulder and back into the world around him. The engine quirk inheritor watched his classmate and friend walk with him up to the line, and near sink into the ground as he prepared to run with a look of focus that was almost too serious for someone like the green-haired boy. Before their teacher could call them off to race, the Tenya sibling questioned his partner as to what he was doing. All Ida got in response was, "Running as fast as I can." So Ida took the challenge, revving up his calves and readying by Izuku's side until their sensei shot them off and the two darted ahead. The two boys launched into their run, kicking up the dirt behind them as they zoomed past the field into the finish line before passing it and skidding to their stops. The two were impressive with their time, but only one of them looked impressed. Ida had managed to beat his last time by near a full second, and Izuku caught up fast enough to match Ida's previous record. And as impressive as it was and as proud as Ida was of them both, Izuku's focus drew blank, opting to focus on his own body. And the power still coursing through him, pushing as much of One for All as it could through his body before he could break him body apart from moving. Of all that One for All gave him the ability to do, and of all the quirks in the world Izuku was a parent of, speed was the most double-edged sword in the world. It was a weird quirk and ability, at least from what Izuku knew and could compare it to, since it was such an independent factor on the human body. Speed did not work with those who could use it to their advantage the way they could, the way Midoriya could, with strength. The brain wasn't in effect, nor were many parts of the body when speed was in effect. People could not think and see and use their brains as fast as they could move. No quirk made apparent in the word had yet to allow for that. The Tenya family, All Might, even Stain were very fast people, and Izuku had watched all of them at work in that department, and he knew almost for an undisputed fact that their brains were not as quick as their hands and feet. Everything they did, they thought up of before they could do it like everyone else did and responded in a speed that was all too natural in a world of superhumans. There wasn't a known way around that fact. All for One may hold an ability that could allow for such a thing, but Izuku has no intention of visiting that man up close anytime soon, or ever if the world allowed for that. So with a dead end blocking his train of thought, Izuku put the question of mind and speed aside to focus on the grip strength test the class was moving on to, instead of Ida and Uraraka joining him in the test. Though still with each other in the moment, Kirishima took side by Izuku to comment on the speed the successor had moved at. He'd seen the green teen move with speed and agility before, but to be near neck and neck with someone whose quirk is all about speed was something else. Izuku thanked him for the compliment and watched on as Kirishima activated the stones to his hands and squeezed down on the grip, eyeing with the horn teen as the numbers rose. Izuku followed suit, coursing the power through his hand and pushing slowly on the grip, bringing the device closer together. The numbers rose higher and higher until the screen flashed the boys with an error sign, leaving them confused until they noticed Izuku's fingers and begun digging into the grip and leaving dents in the handles. Izuku dropped it in shock, and just as fast as he let it go he crouched down to catch it before it could hit the dirt, and held it across in the palms of his still glowing hands. The two boys look at the device in shock to rival Kaminari's, but the red-haired teen ended up having to control his laughter while still congratulating his classmate for being as strong as he was. The green-haired boy on his part broke down into apologies, trying to explain that his quirk didn't usually put out more power and strength into his actions than he was aware of and that breaking the device wasn't in his attention. But the damage had been done, and Aizawa still had to mark down what number Izuku could last remember seeing on the screen before flashing error. The two boys walked off to the rest of their class, and in it Kirishima commented on just how strong Izuku really was despite his appearances. But Izuku didn't really believe that. Izuku was strong, but One for All wasn't what made him strong. The quirk was something else from the teen, a strength residing in the boy and the boy's actual strength. It existed almost separately from Midoriya, only connecting by being something he could use. He could utilize strength beyond anything he could imagine, but even then he couldn't use it all, not in one go and not at the best it could offer the boy. And that was a wall Izuku was left trying to figure out. Not just what he could do with the quirk, but how he could ever use all the strength and might hiding away in his own body without having to hold back as much as he was and did. It was a thought that carried into the tests that followed, as he outperformed on the standing long jump, as he did fairly well for the less common movement of the sustained sideways jumps, as he powered in all that he could handle to his finger and launched the ball in the pitch test the way he did on day one. And he thought of it because he knew something was not right, because he could feel how off his body was as he performed with his quirk, no matter how well he did. There was something to his quirk he wasn't getting, some very important detail he didn't know how to find, and he still had to figure out how to go about finding it. So as they found out where they ranked in the class, as Izuku found himself in the top 10 of his classmates, as they walked back to change to their uniforms, Izuku stayed locked in his thoughts over his quirk. What was it that he didn't know about the stockpiling quirk? A mixture of a quirk that can move from person to person and a quirk of building strength that was holding it back from using its power. He moved it from just a portion to his body to mapping it over his whole body, so what was the next logical step? What did he need to do to master the power bestowed upon him? Izuku kept his quirk running as he changed into his uniform, much slower than his classmates as his mind registered how his body felt with a quirk, similar in a way that All Might had his might form. The power was in his blood, so it should technically be a part of him, but it still wasn't. All Might seemed to have countered that problem by having a form that could handle it, and Izuku wasn't sure if that was a mutation of his quirk when he got it or something every wielder of One for All would have. He'd have to check in with his predecessor on that. But if it was genetically a part of them, why didn't it work just normally? Was it because the power had grown so much that the two of them, mentor and student, had to find another way for their bodies to handle it? Couldn't their bodies come to regularly use the power? Why break his bones if it was a part of him now? Izuku froze midway as he putting on his undershirt. Did One for All not transfer to his bones? Was that the problem? Did the power bestowed on 8 people before him only flow through the blood and not reach the bone? The quirk could only be passed through the donation of a form of DNA. But Izuku swallowed a strand of hair. That went through his digestive system, not his veins. But it somehow got in there, in his blood. Could One for All be an emitter quirk? Was there a hidden ability of it to emit through his body, so the power could move from his stomach to his blood? Could he move it to his bone? Could he move it to his skin? Izuku moved with haste to finish dressing before swiping a notebook and pen from his locker and began to jot down his thoughts and questions on the page. By the time Izuku nearly completed a whole page, he noticed that the last of his classmates were leaving the lockers to head back to class, and he hurried to follow behind them. He did straggle in the back of the crowd, staying on his page of notes and looking it over again to see if there was something he had missed. And there was. Only it wasn't on the page, but beside him and giving him a look. "You all right there, Dad of the Year?" Izuku let out a surprise in the thinking pose of his hand around his chin as he found his earjack earbud classmate walking by his side back to class. He made motion to respond until the nickname she had given him registered in his ears, and he broke into stutters and attempts to call off that nickname. Jiru gave a small smile and threw a hand onto his shoulder with a pat. "Calm down, crazy kid. I'm just messing with ya." Izuku worked to do just that as the girl kept speaking. "Though I have to admit, it's adorable that she thinks that. And I mean that genuinely. Why, yeah, it is. I think I almost screamed when she first said that. And that would have been bad." Izuku chuckled red and scratched the back of his head. What's up? I was going to ask you that. What you're writing there?" Jiru gestured with a finger to the notebook open in his other hand, and Izuku looked down to it as well. "Oh, I'm just writing notes about my quirk." The sound-based quirk user whistled low. "Did you write all of that just now?" "Why, yeah. Damn, I'm impressed. I don't think I could write that much at a moment's notice." Jiru let out a sigh and crossed her arms with a throw of her head back. "What are you writing about with your quirk? I saw you out there like a glow stick again. What's that about?" Just trying to find a way so I can use my quirk without hurting myself." "Don't you already? I remember when you used to do that a lot, but I thought you got past that." "I do, but I can't use all the power at once. My quirk." Now that he had a legally named and defined quirk, he would have to work with it for when others found it out. "I can't use all the strength as I am right now. I need to keep training my body so I can. But until then I can only use a fraction of all the strength I can without tearing my body apart, so I'm trying to figure out a way to balance the power of my quirk with my body to fix that." "Oh, that's how it works." Jiru hummed at Izuku's side. "And you had your quirk active to ... what? So I could better judge how my quirk interacts with my body and try to find a workaround for my problems. I needed to figure out better how my body acts when my quirk is active to figure out what it isn't doing and see if there is a way to make it do what I need it to." "So you were testing your quirk while our quirks were being tested. That's both impressive and sounds like you were pressed for time and cramming and training you've skipped." Izuku immediately became defensive, fighting against the notion that he would skip his much-needed training. But Jiru laughed it off to him that it was just another joke. Izuku sighed as their class returned to the room. "Good luck, by the way." Izuku looked back up to Jiru and the serious expression she wore. "On figuring out how to not hurt yourself anymore." "Good luck." Izuku stared at her in silence for a moment before smiling back and nodding his thanks to the girl before they joined the rest of their class in the room. Saturday, Izuku thought Eri reminded him of someone, really after she had been freed from the hold of the Yakuza and placed in the Midoriya family. Her contrasting natures of cheery when in the more comfortable situations and involving her family and heroes, and of shy when around crowds of people she was still unsure of trusting. Izuku never thought someone could be both at the same time as easily as she made it seem, until he remembered it basically summarized what he was before Yuei, and he could do nothing but sympathize with her. He had a hard time breaking out of the reclusive shell that he and Katsuki and most of the rest of the world around him built over the years of his childhood. For the longest time he felt trapped in it, as though it was molded to fit his body and then dipped in cement, just for the means of making it worse to make it worse. Teachers and students and people on the street who saw him made no effort in breaking him out. Katsuki was an active vandalizer. His mother had lost almost all hope in seeing him at his brightest. and All Might had, just for a moment, turned away from the boy on their first encounter. But then All Might came back and took his first chip at the wall Izuku hid behind, giving Izuku his first glimpse of hope, a glimpse of happiness in a world that kept trying to bring him down. Then Uraraka came by and with her smile gave Izuku another glimpse at the light. Then Ida came by and, though judgmental at first, came to understand Izuku and commended Izuku in a way he wasn't familiar with. Then came Asui, and Takoyami, and Mei, and Maita, and Kirishima, and Todoroki, and Mirio, and the rest of his class and friends he made. And though he barely knew them all, he found them helping him open up more and stop hiding away. Izuku hoped that one day they could help Eri do the same. In time, and time it would take, it seemed she could open up, one person at a time. But even then the more outgoing nature of some of his classmates were just too much for her to take in as suddenly as they tried. Slowly, she was growing accustomed to their behaviors. But Izuku could tell there was still quite a ways for them to go before their actions came across as just that normal instead of clashing with the more toned nature the Midoriya family around her was more about. But Izuku was confident that she would open up to more than just himself and their close family and uncles. She had opened up to him after everything she had lived through, so it gave Midoriya a sense of hope that her trust would branch out beyond him. Instead of trying to make that day sooner, Izuku chose to treat life with Eri normally. A big reason Eri was allowed to stay on Yuei campus like she was because of the heroes around to protect her, to keep her safe from the hands of the likes of the Yakuza and League of Villains. Yuei was meant to be a safe house, but Izuku wanted it to feel like a regular house for the young girl. He wanted her to feel like she had the freedom she deserved and that heroes weren't watching over her shoulder every second to make sure she was safe. So Izuku took her out for the day to play in the snow. Apparently Eri knew so little about the white weather when living under Overhaul. It existed, and she could faintly remember a time before Hell when she could see the snow out a window, but she had little experience out in it. And she knew it was cold to the skin, and enough could be piled up to make shapes. But she never had hands-on experience with the weather like that. So with the power invested in Izuku took Eri outside into the winter wonderland and beyond. So Izuku not only took her outside, but off campus, away from the flatlands to a park the older Midoriya was familiar with when he was a child. He didn't believe he had done enough for Eri to make her feel like she was living a childhood she should, or just a childhood that wasn't so secluded. So time away from the rooms and outside in the calm snow felt right. It had stopped falling overnight, though the clouds never went away, so the streets and grass and sidewalks had their own varying layers of snow. Instead of carrying Eri over the powder, Izuku led her down by his side to trudge through it, hand in hand. Eri was smiling, despite the cold weather and the more than usual amount of layers over her to prevent a cold. She was smiling, being happy, and kicking up snow with some of her steps just because of the way it fell back down was so calm and pretty, and Izuku just wanted to watch it and nothing else. He just wanted to sit by and watch Eri play in the snow because it was so goddamn cute and nothing else should have to matter other than making her smile. Izuku brushed the snow off the swing once they arrived to the park and helped Eri aboard the plastic seat hung by metal. She couldn't recall if she had gone on any before. None were built in the hold for her, so Midoriya had no qualms letting her experience the serenity of swinging for probably the first time. She sounded off in giggles to indicate she enjoyed the swing the longer she was on it. So the two stayed there by the swings, Izuku standing behind to help push her just enough for her to have fun and not fly off by accident, and Eri holding on tight to the chains with her gloves and giggling as she swung back and forth. And Mina Ashido plopped down in the swing beside them. "Hey there, Midoriya fam," the pink girl greeted with a grin and a giggle as the two members of the family jolted in surprise and held each other in comfort. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you like that. I just wanted to say hi." Izuku calmed his breath to the winter air as he stood up straight again with Eri turned in the swing holding onto his coat and Ashido seated across from them giggling into her own mittens. Hey, Ashido, the teen Midoriya greeted. "I didn't see you there. Sorry about that." "Nah, it's cool. Kinda just got here. Saw you two come over here and decided to say hi. Sorry for scaring you like that." The pink-skinned hero chuckled a breath of giddy and nervous air as her hands rubbed together. "I wasn't expecting to see you all the way out here. What's up?" Izuku looked down and patted Eri's back gently, while the little girl kept half her face covered against his winter coat and the other looking in the direction of the teen girl. "Eri here hasn't really been in the snow before, so I decided to take her out today and play in it. And, hey, this is a park I used to play around in when I was a kid, so I thought I'd take her here to see it too. You've been here before." The pink teen hummed and swung her feet forward, rocking the set she was on slightly. "Well, I've never seen you here, and I've come here a lot." "You have?" Izuku turned away as he asked the question, reassuring Eri with his hands and helping her sit back down normally on the swing, though facing him instead of away. "I came here a lot when I was younger, but I haven't really just been here for a few years. Oh, I must have found it after you left it then. I found this a couple years back, but I haven't come over all that often." "When did you stop coming here?" Izuku placed his hands on the swing on either side of Eri and pushed her back gently, letting her swing back and forth slowly. I stopped coming here when I was 10. Didn't really have anyone to play with, so I kinda just stopped. Ashido let out a heartier laugh than her others. Dude, I found this place when I was 11. I missed you by a year. How unlucky can I get? Unlucky. Izuku turned back to his classmate as his hands moved on their own, catching Eri's mittens on the chains and giving them a small push to keep her swinging to and from him. Yeah, unlucky. You know how cool it would have been to meet you before coming to Yuei. The only person I knew was Kiri, and I bet he would have loved to know you when we were younger too. Your smarts probably would have helped us. The alien queen laughed nervously and shrugged helplessly at her classmate. I'd probably rank higher in the class if I had you back then. You're a lot smarter than I thought you would be. I'm jealous. Izuku blushed a smile at his classmates before turning back to Eri to soften it, and luckily for him getting a smile in return from the young girl. You're smart too, Ashido-san. I'm not sure you're giving yourself enough credit. The horned girl scoffed a smaller smile and swung her legs out as her seat went forward. Tell that to my grades. Grades aren't everything. The pink girl looked back to Izuku, who kept his eyes on the silent Eri, who looked back to him, just as interested as the other girl in what he was saying. I mean, yeah, they're important, but they aren't the only kind of smarts. I still think you're smart. Izuku moved a hand so Eri came swinging in, and his finger booped her on the nose and elicited a giggle. He smiled to her again before turning back to his smiling classmate, unaware that it was directed to just how cute the boy was with the girl who claimed him as her father. If anything, you've shown to be smart with your quirk. It's really just acid you're able to produce, but I've seen you use it to slide around, climb and launch yourself in the air instead of just using it to destroy. I've seen you be smart where it counts for a hero, and that's so far better than me. What? The pink girl turned in the swing when she could calm it down and sat sideways on it to face her classmate. There is no way I'm a better hero than you. Have you not looked at what you've done? You're probably the closest in the class to being like our teachers, but you've already figured out how to use your quirk better than I can use mine. Izuku tapped a hand to his chest a few times. I still can't use my quirk to its fullest without being a danger to that and those around me, so you're already far better a hero than me in that depart. Izuku cut off as a body flew into him, near throwing him onto his back before he could catch himself and the girl against his chest. The two students looked down at the girl hugging into Midoriya's chest and squeezed on as best as she could. The little girl shook her head on his chest rapidly before throwing her head up to look at him with a pout. You're not a danger. Her voice wasn't loud, it was soft, and it broke Izuku's heart to have made that. The green-haired teen sighed and helped Eri sit in his arms against his chest. I didn't mean it like that. Ashido sat in silence on her swing watching the two Midoriyas grow quieter. My quirk is strong, and I can't control it all. It is dangerous if I can't learn to control it properly. You're not. Izuku didn't hear the shuffling of the snow until the sound was beside him and the body was on top of him. Izuku looked over his shoulder at the pink menace smiling down at him and Eri. The green teen blushed at the extra body on him, but his classmate promptly ignored the look. Of course you're not dangerous, Midori. Sure, a bit reckless every now and again, but you aren't a danger to anyone. This little girl here is proof of that. Nina reached over to pat Eri on the head very gently, and the girl squished into her and Izuku's jacket from the touch. If you're trying to learn how to control your quirk properly, maybe I could help you. I know our quirks aren't even close to being the same, but maybe the idea of them could be enough. Izuku blinked up at his classmate to flutter away the red on his face. Are you sure? Of course. I wouldn't mind helping you, but for a price. The red faded quickly, along with a lot of the rest of the color from Izuku's face. Could you help me study? Midoriya looked on as the blood flowed back to his face and the girl over him giggled nervously. I know you said the school work and grades aren't everything, but there's still something with the school, especially with Aizawa-sensei. And I'd ask Momo to help, but I think her bubbliness would be too much to pay attention to the work. Would ... that be alright? Yeah, if you're sure. Izuku felt a weight lifted off his shoulder and Mina took to her feet and allowed Izuku to stand up with Eri still in his arms. Of course I'm sure. You're like the third smartest person in the class, and literally everyone else up there is too stiff. Although you are too, but you can get out of that a lot more easily than they can. Yeah, I guess I am. Sorry about that. Nah, it's cool. You're the most lighthearted stiff of the top of our class. But if you're cool with helping me study, then thanks. And Eri and I can watch over you and make sure you don't have to think you could be dangerous. The pink-skinned girl looked back to the small girl in Izuku's arms before gasping and bringing her fists to shake in front of her mouth. Oh my god, we could be horned buddies too. The acid-crafting teen kept her voice low enough not to scare the girl as she bent her knees and got closer to the two. Would that be cool with you? You have such a cute horn. I don't think Kiri would mind adding a third member to the club. Why didn't I realize this sooner? Eri stared back at the pink girl with the one eye not covered by Izuku's jacket silently and lifted a small hand to her own stub of a horn. The pink girl stared back at her and nodded. I think it's adorable. "Wanna touch mine?" The teen leaned her head closer to the girl, letting her horns angle in front of Eri and in her reach. The young girl looked at them still for a good few moments before she worked up the courage to reach out and brush her fingers down one of them. Mina smiled wider and kept her body still as to not scare Eri away. And Izuku watched from his place right there with them as the interaction took place with a smile on his face. That was what Izuku wanted to see. Eri there and interacting closely with his classmates, even if it was just one at a time, and not shying away within a second. To see her there, mesmerized and fixated even if not smiling, is what he was hoping she would be one day with everyone living around her. And while Mina wasn't his first guess of who Eri would open up to next in his class, or at least start to, her efforts were greatly appreciated. Thought much more energetic at times. A personality and presentation Izuku was more common with C. To see her taking her time just enough for the younger girl was welcomed by the green teen. Then Mina remembered what Izuku said as to why he and Eri were out in the snow and opted to join them, and give Eri her first experience with making a snowman. The girl got excited, and Izuku with a chuckle as she looked up to him for approval chose to let it happen. The young one only got more excited as Mina decided to also make the task of adding a horn to it as well once they made the head, and Izuku let himself laugh as Eri was immersed in snow.